Chapter 532. Could it be that he's the reason why the 10th moon appeared in the candle dragon's undying and imperishable world? That small snake on his shoulder is entirely light red, and there's a slit at the center of its brows. When it looked at me, I felt my skin crawl. Could it be? Could it be? The golden thread sacred bat's breathing quickened, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He fled even faster. Could it be that the candle dragon has been resurrected? The golden thread sacred bat's teeth chattered. Just as this terrifying thought appeared in his head, a powerful roar came from the distance, and it made him feel as if his soul was about to leave his body. That roar could seize his soul, and it made him instinctively turn his head back to look. The instant he looked in the direction of the roar, his face instantly turned pale, and not a single hint of blood could be seen on his face. He saw a gigantic shadow in the sky in the distance. That shadow was clearly a candle dragon. It had its mouth wide open, and as it roared, it looked as if it was devouring something. That shadow might be indistinct, but he would definitely not be mistaken. He knew that there was a member of his tribe running in that direction, and when he saw the candle dragon's shadow, he knew that his tribe member was most likely dead. Besides feeling shocked, the golden thread bat gritted his teeth, and he was just about to disregard everything and flee madly. However, right at the instant he turned around, his body stopped abruptly, and he felt his entire body go numb, because a figure had suddenly appeared before him, and that figure was looking coldly at him. That person's face was calm, and his gaze was aloof, as if he was looking at a dead man. He stood there quietly, causing the golden thread sacred bat's expression to change drastically. Just as he was about to retreat, Su Ming took a step forward, lifted his right hand, and pointed at the center of the golden thread sacred bat's brows. "How dare you?" The golden thread sacred bat let out a piercing screech, and the wings on his back tilted forward to form a shield before him. The instant they turned into a layer of protection, he swiftly formed a seal with his hands and pushed them forward. Ripples instantly spread out, but the shape of those ripples made them look like the face of a ferocious ghost, and it charged forward to devour him. At the same time, he bit the tip of his tongue and coughed out a mouthful of golden blood. That blood turned into a golden bat, and with a piercing screech, it charged forward. That was not the end. Once he finished doing all this, the golden thread sacred bat seized the air with his right hand, and the circular golden scimitar immediately appeared in his hand. With a swing, that scimitar stirred up a layer of golden light that charged towards Su Ming. In his haste, he could only use these methods. However, being able to execute these divine abilities within such a short amount of time was a telling sign of just how powerful the golden thread sacred bats were. The sacred bat's body. Dragon's sacred bat was able to do it. Sacred bat was sacred bat, and with a sacred bat. Sacred dragon let out with a sacred, and that was sacred bat. Sacred dragon on sacred Ming, sacred that dragon. Once the wings spread out, Su Ming's finger did not stop. He tapped the golden thread sacred bat's second layer of defense, and the ripples in the shape of a ghost face appeared once again. When those ripples completely disappeared, the golden thread sacred bat that was formed by the golden blood he coughed out rushed towards Su Ming's finger with a piercing screech. Before the lingering sounds of that rumbling sound disappeared, a new one rose into the air. The golden bat exploded with a screech, but the speed of Su Ming's finger had been reduced by a large margin. Its might had also been reduced due to the golden thread sacred bat's multiple layers of defense. As the golden bat disappeared, the golden thread sacred bat's golden scimitar appeared right before Su Ming's finger. The two of them clashed in an instant, and a shocking boom reverberated in the air. Blood trickled out of the golden thread sacred bat's mouth, and his body tumbled backwards. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He stood in midair and did not retreat. He only pulled back his finger. That finger did not have a name. It had gone through tens of millions of transformations, and ever since Su Ming had completed the undying and imperishable world, there had not been a single person who had not died under that one finger. Now, this golden thread sacred bat was the first one. The golden thread sacred bat's face was pale and filled with terror. As he swiftly retreated, he could not help but cough out blood. He might not have died, but his terror towards Su Ming's finger had reached its peak. His multiple layers of defense might have negated most of the force, but the remaining force still caused his chi to tumble about, and he lost a large amount of his life force. What is this divine ability? The golden thread sacred bat was retreating. He knew that he was on the verge of death, and it was impossible for him to escape. That was why he decided to go mad. How dare you injure me? I'm a golden thread sacred bat. I'm the messenger of our sacred ancestors' will. If you kill me, it's the same as declaring war against the sacred bats. You won't be able to bear the consequences of that. As the golden thread sacred bat roared, his eyes turned bloodshot. He was afraid, incredibly afraid. To him, Su Ming's strength made him feel as if he could not fight against him. Su Ming's expression remained as calm as ever. He took a step forward and lifted his right hand. Once he tested the strength of his physical body, he wanted to see just how strong his divine abilities were. He clenched his right fist, and as he moved forward, he threw a punch toward the sky. That punch was called wind delivery, and it stirred up a large amount of violent gusts of wind that charged towards the sky. The sky rumbled, and the entire layer of clouds crumbled at that instant, turning into a gigantic vortex that started spinning continuously in the sky. Wind fusion, Su Ming stated calmly. He unfurled his lifted right hand and seized the air in the direction of the sky. Immediately, the vortex in the sky grew several dozens of times its original size. Once it covered most of the sky, it charged towards Su Ming's right hand like a tornado. At that moment, wind and thunder tumbled about. Su Ming stood in midair, and his right hand looked as if he had the sky in his grasp, as if he had control over the entire vortex of wind. Sun Genesis. The instant he said those two words, Su Ming swung his right hand, and immediately, the vortex of wind he controlled charged towards the golden thread sacred bat with a powerful presence. From the distance, this scene was like a shocking sight. Su Ming's hair danced in the air, and his expression was calm. The scars under his eyes especially gave off a strange charm. On the other hand, the golden thread sacred bat's face was filled with terror. His eyes were bloodshot, and he had become even more crazed. Between the two of them was a whirlwind that connected the sky and earth. That whirlwind was sweeping in all directions, and as it charged towards the golden thread sacred bat, it looked as if it wanted to drown him. The shadow of death loomed over the golden thread sacred bat in the midst of his madness. He was not willing to die like this, and as he struggled, he lifted his head and roared towards the sky. Once he lifted his hands and formed a strange seal, he tapped his own body. Instantly, he started trembling, and all the feathers on his body fell off. Once those golden feathers fell off, they turned into rays of golden light that stirred up piercing whistles as they charged towards the vortex. Once he finished doing all this, the golden thread sacred bat bit the tip of his tongue once again and coughed out a huge mouthful of blood. His upper body bent down so that his back was facing the sky, and he lifted his forehead. Veins popped up all over his face, and when he looked incredibly ferocious, he let out a hoarse roar. Sacred bats, mountain-carrying art, eternal autumn rain, origin stone monument. As he roared, loud booming sounds immediately rang out in the air above him, and a gigantic stone monument manifested out of thin air. That stone monument was incredibly big. It was 1,000 feet tall, and once it appeared, there were a large amount of complicated words carved on it. It pressed down on the golden thread sacred bat's back, making it look as if he was the one carrying the stone monument. A vast power spread out from the stone monument and fought against the incoming whirlwind of Sun Genesis. Then it charged downwards in the direction where the whirlwind was coming from. The two sides crashed into each other in an instant. The first thing Su Ming's wind of Sun Genesis crashed into was the light that was the endless golden feathers. As booming sounds reverberated in the air, those feathers all shattered, and the whirlwind did not stop for even a moment as it swept through the area. It crashed straight into the stone monument formed by the golden thread sacred bat's divine ability. Booming sounds spread through the world and into the shaman's valley, causing all the shamans to look at the sky with their hearts trembling. Those sounds even traveled even further into the distance. The stone monument shattered inch by inch and eventually crumbled completely. But at the same time, most of Su Ming's wind of Sun Genesis also dissipated after the monument crumbled, but the remaining power still swept through the area and charged towards the golden thread sacred bat. The golden thread sacred bat coughed out blood once again, and his body instantly withered. Despair appeared in his eyes, along with a madness that looked as if he was going to die. He decided that he might as well not dodge anymore, but instead knelt down on one knee and let out the strongest roar towards the sky. Moon progenitor, the sacred ancestor that we sacred bats have worshipped since ancient times, with the body of a golden thread sacred bat, I will borrow your power to worship the moon and allow my blood to be burned 3 times. As the golden thread sacred bat roared, he swiftly bowed towards the 9 moons in the sky. With that bow, Su Ming's heart trembled. He could clearly feel that the 9th moon among the 9 moons in the sky had grown slightly larger. With this bow, I will make the sea of fire surge into the sky and burn everything. The golden thread sacred bat's body seemed to be unable to withstand the power of that bow. Purple flames could be seen gushing out from his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. In an instant, they filled the area and turned into a sea of fire that surged into the sky. As that sea of fire burned, if anyone looked toward the sky from the ground, they would be able to clearly see that the sea of fire looked like a person's palm. That palm in the sea of fire lifted up swiftly, and as if it contained some sort of will, it pressed down on Su Ming. As I thought, it's related to the wings of the moon and the fire berserker. The fire berserker's burning of blood and the 9 blood moon worshipping art really appeared here. But there are some slight differences. A focused glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. When he saw the sacred bats, he had already suspected it, and now that he saw this scene before him, he was certain of his guess. Art to worship the moon, fire berserker's art, moon progenitor? A cold sneer appeared on Su Ming's lips. In the face of the incoming sea of fire palm, his expression remained the same. Fire berserker. Su Ming was a fire berserker. He lifted his right hand, bit the tip of his finger, and pressed it against his left pupil. How exciting would it be to meet the real and the fake? I'm begging for monthly votes. I'm begging for recommendation votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 533. At the instant Su Ming pressed his finger against his left pupil, the world in his left eye turned red. When he swiped his hand across his right eye, Su Ming's entire world turned into a blood-red light. It was as bright as blood, and it burned like fire. The instant Su Ming executed the burning of blood, a thick wave of flames erupted from his body with a bang. That fire did not have the presence of the gigantic palm of fire in the sky, but it filled Su Ming's entire body, causing his hair to dance in the air. When he lifted his head to look at the sky, he gave off a feeling of determination, as if he was facing the sky falling and the earth shattering. I'm the scion of the fire berserker, and I also know the art of worshipping the moon. Su Ming lifted his arms, wrapped his fist in his palm, and bowed swiftly towards the 9th moon in the sky. With that one bow, the 9th moon in the sky started distorting, and overlapping shadows started appearing beside it. The palm of fire charging towards Su Ming shuddered, as if it could not withstand Su Ming's bow, and as it closed in, it started showing signs of extinguishing. The golden thread sacred bat, not too far away, was already dumbfounded. A loud bang rang out in his head, and disbelief and shock appeared on his face. He knew just how powerful Su Ming was. By right, no matter what divine ability Su Ming executed to fight against the sea of fire, his expression should not have changed continuously like this. However, he did not expect that Su Ming would use the exact same art to fight against the sea of fire, the art of worshipping the moon. This was something he could not have expected, and it practically overturned his thoughts. The art of worshipping the moon was a sacred bat's direct line of inheritance, and only the golden thread sacred bats could master it. It was impossible for other races to obtain it. This was an art personally passed down by the moon progenitor whom the sacred bats worshipped. It was their sacred art, and at that moment, he saw Su Ming casting it right before his eyes. In fact, when Su Ming cast this art, the golden thread sacred bat had the misconception that the art of worshipping the moon was even more orthodox than when he cast it. One had to know that he needed to borrow the power of the moon ancestor to use this technique, so he couldn't do it as he pleased. Most importantly, he only knew how to pray to the moon, not the burning of blood. Only the great sect elder and the tribe leader could be given the method to practice the burning of blood by the moon progenitor. This was the strongest art in the sacred bats. But that was not all. What made the golden thread sacred bat feel as if his willpower was about to crumble was that once Su Ming executed the burning of his blood and bowed towards the ninth moon in the sky, the presence and feeling spreading out from his body made the golden thread sacred bat feel as if he was facing the statue of the sacred ancestor in Eternally Mountain. Respect and fear rose from the depths of his heart. Who are you? Just who are you? Why do you know the art passed down by our sacred bat's moon progenitor? The golden thread sacred bat roared, almost on the verge of breaking down, and retreated swiftly. The art of worshipping the moon that you spoke of is the divine ability of the fire barbarian tribe. Who are you? Su Ming's expression was cold and dark. He took a step forward and spread his divine sense outwards, turning it into a mighty pressure that pressed down on the golden thread sacred bat with the presence he gained after the burning of his blood. I am a sacred bat. The golden thread sacred bat was just about to speak when he was immediately cut off by Su Ming's words. I am the successor of the art of worshipping the moon. I am the only fire berserker in the world, and you're asking me that? Su Ming smiled coldly, and his words tumbled out with his mighty pressure. The sacred bats look incredibly similar to the wings of the moon. I'd like to know, what is your connection with the wings of the moon? Su Ming took a step forward. Who is this moon progenitor you speak of? How did he know this art? Su Ming continued speaking, not giving the retreating golden thread sacred bat too much time to think. With the mighty pressure formed by his powerful divine sense, he continued asking questions while the golden thread sacred bat's mind was in chaos. How did the sacred bats worship this so-called moon progenitor? The fire berserker art you practice isn't complete. You only know a portion of it. Do you know the burning of blood? If you practice the fire berserker art, then how dare you use it before me? Forget about the fact that you overestimated yourself. Who made you come out on such a large scale this time? Once Su Ming asked a few different questions in succession, his voice suddenly grew louder, and he asked a question that was almost as loud as thunder. Who made you come? Su Ming's question was like a thunderous roar, causing the golden thread sacred bat's consciousness to crumble under the pressure of Su Ming's repeated questions and his divine sense. It's the moon progenitor. He staggered backwards, and his head buzzed. Su Ming's thunderous words made him feel as if he had to answer. It was as if a will had descended on him, and he could not fight against it. Where is the moon progenitor? Su Ming moved forward once again, and his voice boomed even louder. Eternally Mountain, when was I worshipped by your tribe? Su Ming continued getting closer, and his voice grew louder, causing the golden thread sacred bat's consciousness to crumble and blood to flow out of his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. It's been a long, long time. I don't know. The golden thread sacred bat finally could no longer bear with it and let out a shrill scream of pain. He pressed his hands against his head and retreated swiftly. His screams of pain reverberated in the air. His vision became clouded and blood trickled down the corners of his mouth. Su Ming's voice was echoing non-stop in his head at that moment, and it was growing louder with each passing moment, as if his mind was about to crumble. Su Ming stopped moving and cast a glance at the staggering sacred bat before retrieving his divine sense in the presence of the fire berserker after the burning of blood. He lifted his right hand and swung it at the golden thread sacred bat. With that one swing, a gigantic shadow suddenly appeared behind the golden thread sacred bat whose consciousness was crumbling. That shadow was the candle dragon. It opened its mouth wide and swallowed the golden thread sacred bat. The shadow disappeared and turned into a small snake that charged toward Su Ming. It coiled around his shoulder and occasionally hissed. Su Ming frowned and stood in midair, immersed in his thoughts for a moment. It's not foam. Based on what the sacred bats said, this so-called moon progenitor has been worshipped for a long, long time. The time doesn't match up, but I'll have to see how long I've been in the undying world and how many years have passed in the world outside. Eternally Mountain. In his silence, Su Ming felt that this name was rather familiar, but no matter how much he thought about it, he could not remember just what part of it was familiar. As he mulled over it, Su Ming turned around and walked towards the valley where the shamans lived. When he saw the valley where the shamans lived in the distance, he still could not figure out just why Eternally Mountain was so familiar. However, he was certain that he had never heard of this mountain before. When Su Ming returned to the valley, he received a grand welcome. All the remaining shamans walked out of their cave abodes, and once they saw Su Ming, all of them knelt down on the ground and worshipped him. We're the abandoned ones. We call ourselves the fated kin. Greetings, Sir Mo Su. Hundreds of people knelt down, and hundreds of voices fused together to form a wave of sound that reverberated in the air. There was sincerity and gratitude in those voices, along with zealous reverence. To them, Su Ming's appearance was like a beacon of light in the darkness, like a ray of hope in the midst of despair. Su Ming slowly descended from midair and stood before the group of people who called themselves fated kin. He looked at this group of people who were dressed in rags and were mostly as thin as sticks and saw the excitement and respect in their eyes. "Why do you call yourselves fated kin?" Su Ming asked calmly. Nan Gonghen was also kneeling on the ground. At that moment, he lifted his head and spoke resolutely. "We were abandoned by the shamans. We have no future, no hope. It's better for us to create our own future and control our own hope. It's the same as controlling our own fate. That's why we call ourselves fated kin." Su Ming fell silent and looked at this person once again. He saw that besides zealousness and respect in their eyes, there was also a determination that burned like fire. That determination was a desire to control their own fate, a desire to become powerful warriors who could decide their own fate. They wanted to let the shamans who had abandoned them know that they no longer needed anyone's pity or help. They were fated kin. There were very few old people among them. Besides those in the prime of their lives, most of them were young children. These children were born in this place, and in their minds, the shaman tribe was just a name. They grew up witnessing the deaths of their tribe members. They might still be children, but when they looked at Su Ming, their gazes were filled with zealous respect, and they were also filled with determination. This was a race that was forced out by fate. This was a race that had nothing to do with the shamans, and they had their own will, something that the shamans did not possess. That will was still weak, but if the fated kin were given enough time to grow stronger, then once that will grew, then this race would become incredibly terrifying. We are willing to serve you as our master, and from now on, we will only obey your orders. Nan Gonghen gritted his teeth, and as he spoke in a low voice, all the fated kin kneeling behind him spoke the same words. We are willing to serve you as our master, and we will only obey your orders. That voice was like a raging wave that reverberated in all directions, lingering for a long time. Su Ming remained silent for a moment, then asked slowly after some time, "If the fated kin has a master, can we still be called fated kin?" Nan Gonghen paused for a moment before he spoke once again. "We are willing to serve you as our sacred spirit, and worship your sacred statue for all eternity. Nan Gonghen paused for a moment before he spoke again. How many years has it been since I disappeared? Su Ming avoided Nan Gonghen's request and asked the question he wanted to know. It has been 15 years since you disappeared. Nan Gonghen said in a low voice. Shaman City has turned into ruins, and the terrain of 1,000,000 lis has changed. You stayed here, but have the others left? Just what happened in this place during these 15 years? Su Ming's gaze was grave as he looked at Nan Gonghen. This was his final goal in coming to this valley. Nan Gonghen's face was filled with anguish. After a moment of silence, he spoke languidly. 15 years ago, 3 months after you disappeared, the moment Nan Gonghen said those words, the small snake on Su Ming's shoulder suddenly lifted its head. Its shut eyes flew open, and at the same time a freezing glare appeared within them. It let out a piercing howl. A brutal look appeared in its eyes, and it was looking at a sealed cave abode within the valley. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 534. The small snake's change caused Nan Gonghen's words to fall silent. He was momentarily stunned, then immediately turned his head around to look at the ferocious-looking snake. Once he saw the sealed cave abode, a glint appeared in Nan Gonghen's eyes. Su Ming narrowed his eyes, and his gaze fell on the sealed cave abode in the valley. The small snake on his shoulder hissed even louder, and the hatred in its eyes caused all those who saw it to feel apprehensive. That's Senior He Yu's cave abode, Nan Gonghen whispered. Su Ming remained calm. He lifted his right hand and seized at the air. Immediately, a wisp of green smoke appeared on his palm. As that wisp of smoke surrounded him, it turned into a faint shadow that looked as if it was being sucked into the cave abode. By the looks of it, that shadow was the old man in black robes who had set Su Ming up in the past. Su Ming had extracted that wisp of green smoke from that person's divine sense when he was in the undying and imperishable world. He had intended to use it to search for that person in the world outside. Once he saw the small snake's abnormality, he fell into deep thought and brought out that wisp of green smoke to test it. Immediately, a chilling, killing intent appeared in his eyes. So you're here. Su Ming smiled coldly and took a step forward. The small snake on his shoulder also charged out and charged towards the sealed cave abode. Almost the instant Su Ming took that step, a low growl came from within the sealed cave abode. The door to the cave abode exploded with a bang, and a black shadow flew out from within. The moment the black shadow appeared, it immediately ran into the small snake. In a flash, the black shadow let out a muffled groan and cast some unknown divine ability, causing the small snake to freeze for a moment. Taking advantage of this momentary pause, the black shadow was about to soar into the sky. Su Ming let out a cold harumph and took a step forward. His body disappeared, and when he reappeared, he was already in midair, right above the black shadow. The instant Su Ming lifted his right hand and pushed down, the black shadow let out a roar and lifted his right hand as well, crashing into Su Ming's palm through the air. A loud bang rang in the air. Su Ming did not move, but the black shadow coughed out a huge mouthful of blood and fell to the ground. Only at that moment did his appearance appear. That black figure was dressed in a black robe, and he was naturally the old man in black robes who Su Ming wanted to kill. As he landed on the ground, the huge gust of wind stirred up, and the hood over his head fluttered, revealing a rotting face. His appearance was extremely ugly. Most of his flesh and blood had already rotted, and there were even some places where his bones could be seen. Destiny. The old man let out a piercing screech and glared at Su Ming. He originally thought that he could avoid Su Ming's divine sense and not be discovered, but he had overlooked the small snake. When he had seized the small snake to threaten the candle dragon and Su Ming in the past, it had seemed to be unconscious, but in truth, it was still conscious. It remembered the old man's presence deeply. That presence might only be a wisp of his divine sense, But once the small snake obtained the candle dragon's legacy, it was no longer the same as it was in the past. That was why it could use that presence to recognize the person hiding in the cave abode and avoiding Su Ming's divine sense. So what if you walked out of the undying and imperishable world? You can't escape Master's arrangements. You can't escape your destiny. The old man laughed ferociously. He knew that he was definitely going to die today. That was why before he came out, he had already swallowed a medicinal core. There was a 10% chance that the curse would be broken, but there was a 90% chance that he would soon lose consciousness, his memories would crumble, and he would turn into an existence like a wild beast. Killing intent shone in Su Ming's eyes. He had originally been suspicious of the old man's origins, but now he no longer had any doubts. This person was Di Tian's dog. He walked forward and appeared before the old man in an instant. Madness appeared in the old man's eyes. He formed a seal with his hands and was just about to cast a divine ability, but his body was already incredibly weak. Before he could even cast that divine ability, Su Ming lifted his right hand and pushed it aside. He grabbed the black robe on the old man's body, and with one tug, the old man's black robe was completely torn off. The black robe fell off, revealing the old man's thin and shriveled body. There was also a foul stench coming from a large area of decay. You're neither a human nor a ghost. Su Ming immediately tapped the old man's chest with his right index finger. With that one tap, the old man shuddered and staggered a few steps back. Black blood flowed out of his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. It doesn't matter if I die. I have complete memories. What about you? Bring your incomplete memories and your confusion with you and walk down the path of your destiny. The old man was so weak at that moment that he could not put up any sort of resistance before Su Ming, but his laughter continued echoing in the area with a hint of madness. Su Ming did not speak. He took a few steps forward and lifted his right hand to tap the old man's chest again. Once he tapped a few times, wisps of black smoke instantly surged out of the old man's chest and charged towards his right arm, causing his entire right arm to look pitch black. It also started rapidly rotting away. Destiny. Your life is destiny. I'll wait for you in hell. The curse in the old man's body completely erupted due to Su Ming's few taps. He roared in pain, looking as if he had gone mad. Yet at the instant he roared, Su Ming moved and appeared next to the old man's right hand. He grabbed the old man's right arm, and like a blade, he cut down on it with his left hand. A cracking sound rang in the air, and the old man's black right arm was instantly separated from his body. The sharp pain caused the old man to descend into even greater madness. Under the curse, his nascent divinity could not leave his body, and he could not even self-destruct. At that moment, under that pain, his roars became even stronger. Master's clone will come at any moment. I'd like to see how you'll fight back then. Destiny, huh? In the end, you still have to walk down the path you should walk. As he roared, Su Ming tapped a few more times on the old man's chest with his right index finger, causing his right arm to instantly turn pitch black. Then, Su Ming cut off his right arm once again. The old man who had lost both his arms continued roaring in pain, and his malicious words continued tumbling out of his mouth. You might have walked out of the undying and imperishable world, but 15 years have passed. 15 years. I can trap you for 15 years, and that's enough. I will die for Master. With Master's divine abilities, once he perfects them, he will definitely be able to resurrect me. Why should I be afraid of death? But your destiny. You will never know just what your memories are, and just how many memories you're missing. As the old man roared, his eyes gradually lost their intelligence, and he let out a roar that sounded like that of a wild beast. As his body trembled, not only did the curse erupt forth at full force, it also rapidly devoured his life force. I won't die by your hands, but by the curse. I can be considered to have been freed, but you'll never know where your sister is. You'll never know just how many mysteries you have. In the midst of your confusion, you'll sink into oblivion. Before the old man could finish speaking, his eyes completely lost their luster, and he completely turned into a wild beast that had lost his intelligence. Death won't be that easy, Su Ming stated calmly. when the old man turned into a wild beast that had lost his divine sense. Su Ming straightened his right hand and pressed his palm against the old man's chest. With that one push, black smoke rose from the old man's chest once again and charged towards his legs. Su Ming waved his arm, causing the old man's legs to immediately explode, and the curse on his body started disappearing at a speed that could be seen with the naked eye. His curse came from the candle dragon. Su Ming had been in the undying and imperishable world for an innumerable amount of years, and the small snake had also acknowledged him as its master. Hence, his understanding towards the curse art was greatly different from before. When he pressed down and lifted his head, the old man's dull and murky eyes gradually brightened up, as if his life force had been stimulated. However, as his eyes grew brighter, his intelligence gradually recovered, and he gradually saw his surroundings clearly. His expression instantly changed drastically. He originally thought that he was already dead, but at that moment, he saw Su Ming saving him. This should have been something joyous, but to him, this was something even more terrifying than death. He could already imagine what sort of punishment and pain he would have to go through once he was captured by Su Ming, now that he was no longer under the curse and was in a weakened state. In fact, there was a high possibility that Su Ming would use all sorts of methods he could think of to continuously squeeze out all of his memories. To him, this sort of thing was even more terrifying than death. He knew that if he had died just now, then he would have died for his master, and he would still have a chance of being resurrected in the future. However, if Su Ming used some sort of method to learn everything from him, then he would truly die. Not only would his master not resurrect him in the future, there is even a high possibility that he would drag down his family in the land of immortals due to his anger. You. The old man's heart trembled, and a monstrous terror appeared in his eyes. He could only watch as Su Ming tapped a few more spots on his body, and he could clearly feel that while he was still weak, the curse on his body had mostly disappeared. Over the past 15 years, he had been struggling, afraid of death, but once he met Su Ming, he was no longer afraid. He wanted to die, but now that he discovered that he could not die, a fear that was even stronger than when he had been afraid of death rose within him. It was especially so because of the words he had said to provoke Su Ming just now. They had become the source of his extreme terror. The scene of Su Ming saving the old man in black fell into the eyes of the people around him. When Nan Gonghen saw it, all of their hearts trembled, and a deep chill rose in their hearts towards what they saw. Just what sort of hatred could make a person feel that even killing someone would not be enough to quench it, and that he would want to save his enemy? Just what sort of hatred could make a person think that death was not a release, and that living was the best release? Just what sort of determination could make a person do this? If he did not even allow death to happen, then just what sort of hell would be waiting for the old man in black robes? Nan Gonghen looked at Su Ming, at him doing all these things with an apathetic and calm expression on his face. His heart turned cold, and he sucked in a sharp breath. Welcome back. When the old man's eyes regained clarity, Su Ming lifted his right hand and pressed it against the top of the old man's head. The power of his cultivation base surged into the old man's body, and once it sealed his entire body, he looked into the old man's eyes, which were filled with extreme terror, and mumbled softly, "Welcome back. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Achidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 535. 15 years ago, there wasn't just one shaman in the world of Nine. There were three. Besides the powerful shamans from the god of Shaman's temple, there were also people from other tribes. At that time, the treasure gambling event had just ended, and there were quite a number of shamans who had already split up and were prepared to head to the three great places of inheritance. That's when the nightmare started. I'll never forget that day. The 1 million lease around Shaman City went through a series of changes. Those changes made it seem as if the entire world of Nine was rejecting outsiders like us. The ground trembled, and an endless amount of cracks appeared. Sacred bats flew out from those cracks. The 9th moon in the sky was blood red at that time, and the entire land was illuminated in a blood-red light. An endless amount of trees seemed to have come to life. They moved from the ground, and strange, piercing whistles echoed in all directions, as if they were crying. Rapidly spinning vortexes appeared in the sky, and as they spun, wisps of black light descended from within. When that black light landed on a person's body, it would immediately fuse into that person's soul, causing that person's soul to be separated from their body, and they would turn into drifting roamers, one of the 3 sacred races in this land. The spirits of 9 also went through a change at that time. They no longer followed the promise they made with the shamans in the past, and instead started killing and banishing all the shamans in the world of 9. The source of all of this was a plan the shamans made. It was a plan that the god of Shaman's temple was in charge of, and all the big tribes agreed to it. The plan was to completely open the tunnel to the world of 9 so that all the people from the big tribes could enter the world of 9 at the same time, without any restrictions. The catastrophe of the eastern wastelands was approaching, and they had to fight against the berserkers to obtain the greatest chance of survival and security when the catastrophe of the eastern wastelands covered the entire land of South Morning. The god of Shaman's temple was in charge of the plan and worked together with all the big tribes and the immortals in the land of the shamans. They wanted to build a powerful relocation rune and turn the world of 9 into a refuge for the big tribes of the shamans and the god of Shaman's temple when the catastrophe of the eastern wastelands arrived. Perhaps the god of Shaman's temple had already prepared this plan a long time ago. Perhaps it wasn't for the sake of refuge in the beginning, but for some other purpose. But at that time, as the catastrophe of the eastern wastelands continued approaching, the god of Shaman's temple and the big tribes finally built this rune in Shaman City in the world of 9 with the help of the immortals. If you've been to the ruins of Shaman City, you should still be able to see the remnants of the rune. The final activation of the rune led to a series of drastic changes in the world of 9. When the tunnel was opened and all the people from the big tribes of the Shaman tribe could enter, the spirits of 9 cast some sort of divine ability, and the head that was placed on the stone pillar that reached the sky in Shaman City was resurrected. His resurrection is the beginning of this calamity. The rune collapsed, the tunnel in the sky was sealed by the rune, and Shaman City was destroyed. This is what I know and saw. Perhaps there are some secrets that no one else knows about, but I don't know about them. However, what the spirits of 9 did not expect was that the Shaman tribe did not have just one rune. Instead, they had set it up in 3 spots in the world of 9. However, a terrifying storm suddenly appeared, and it caused the Shaman tribe's plan to completely fail. Even now, I can't forget that storm. The entire sky was swept up by the wind and sand, turning into a huge figure. Everywhere it passed, all living beings turned into skeletons. The other 2 runes also shattered one by one. Most of the shamans in this place managed to escape before the final rune collapsed. Perhaps it was because the people in this place had intentionally left a sliver of hope for them to survive, allowing most of them to escape before the rune was destroyed. But there were still some who did not manage to escape. As the rune collapsed, they were forced to stay here. After going through a series of deaths and being eliminated, these people gathered together. They were us, who numbered to 10,000 at that time, but now there are only a few hundred of us left. 9 moons hung high in the sky. The land was not too dark, but if anyone looked into the distance, they would find that besides some areas around them that were bright and clear from the moonlight, the area in the distance was still covered in a layer of fog. They could not see clearly. A bonfire burned weakly in the valley. It twisted in the wind, and wisps of green smoke floated into the sky, fusing together with the darkness of the night. Nan Gong Hin sat beside the bonfire. His low voice echoed in the air, and just like the green smoke, he slowly fused into the darkness. Su Ming was silent as he sat before him. As he listened to Nan Gong Hin's description of what happened 15 years ago, pictures of what happened in the past gradually appeared in his head. His heart was shaken by the shaman's plan to seek refuge in this place. If the shamans had truly succeeded, Then once the catastrophe of the eastern wastelands ended, the big tribe of the shamans would not have suffered even the slightest bit of damage. Are the drifting roamers you speak of a soul that seems to have no intelligence and drifts about on the ground? Su Ming remembered Ahu, who was in Shaman City, and sighed. Those are the most basic drifting roamers. They don't have the will they had when they were alive. Based on my experience of fighting against them during the past 15 years, drifting roamers are a sacred race that lives as parasites. They live in the souls of living beings and absorb the power of their souls to grow. When their souls are destroyed, they will have completed their growth. Based on the strength of the souls they live in, they will also have different strengths, Nan Gonghen said calmly. Is there a way to save them? Su Ming looked at Nan Gonghen. We've experimented before, and we've used all sorts of methods, but to no avail. Once a drifting roamer lives in a soul and fuses with it, they will become one with it, and it's difficult to separate them. But I heard that you have Phantom Deish tribe in the land of berserkers. It said that this tribe has great research regarding the art of the soul. Perhaps they can. Nan Gonghen lifted his head and looked at Su Ming. If he still did not know that Su Ming came from the berserker tribe, then he would not have been able to become the leader of the fated kin in this land. In truth, once Su Ming no longer wore his mask, his berserker mark had already explained everything. Besides, during the battle against Tion's servant, the conversations between the two of them and the differences in their arts had already allowed quite a number of people to see this. However, they were no longer shamans. They were fated kin. It did not matter where Su Ming came from, even if he was a berserker. These are all the things that happened 15 years ago. Respected Senior M.O., please don't mind what happened during the treasure gambling event. I was indeed unable to make a decision that was detrimental to the god of Shaman's temple at that time. Nan Gonghen sucked in a deep breath, got up, and wrapped his fist in his palm to bow towards Su Ming. Brother Nan Gong, you don't have to do this. Su Ming shook his head. Respected Senior M.O., please agree to become our sacred spirit. Nan Gonghen bowed once again. Su Ming hesitated for a moment. With your power, you might already be the strongest among all ladder shamans. Even if you can't compare to an end shaman, but you will definitely shock the entire land of South Morning and become one of the powerful warriors. We might not be able to leave, but it's difficult for us fated kin to survive here. If you give up on us, then before long, all the fated kin in this place will die. If I die, then so be it. It's fine, but there are quite a number of children who are born in this place. Nan Gonghen looked at Su Ming and mumbled under his breath. Su Ming looked at Nan Gonghen, and after a long while, he closed his eyes. Time trickled by, and after the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, he opened his eyes and nodded towards Nan Gonghen. If there's really no way to leave, then I will protect the fated kin, but similarly, if I find the way out and return to the land of South Morning, all of you will still have to do the same. Will the fated kin agree to this? Su Ming asked unhurriedly. To him, the existence of the fated kin had touched him, and Nan Gonghen's words had made it impossible for him to reject him too much. However, if he only gave and did not get anything in return, then this sort of thing was not fair to Su Ming. That was why when Su Ming agreed to it, he also made his own request. Fated kin, you are an abandoned race. We will never forget your kindness, Senior Mo. Once we become sacred spirits, we will obey you forever. Nan Gonghen said solemnly. Su Ming looked at Nan Gonghen, and after some time, he nodded his head. He got up and walked towards the valley. There was a cave abode in the valley that had been specially made for him. Nan Gonghen watched Su Ming leave into the distance, then sucked in a deep breath and cast his gaze towards the sky. Can I go back? It's been 15 years. She also went missing in the world of Nineen. Where is she now? Nan Gonghen mumbled in anguish. Once Su Ming returned to his cave abode, he sat down cross-legged with a calm expression on his face. With a wave of his arm, the area before him immediately became indistinct. When that indistinct state disappeared, the old man in black robes who had lost all his limbs appeared before him. Why do you still call me Destiny? Su Ming asked unhurriedly. The old man's face was pale. He had his eyes closed, as if he was in deep sleep. He did not speak a single word. Su Ming waited for a moment, then lifted his right hand. Immediately, the small virescent sword manifested in his hand. Once Su Ming held it in his hand, he stabbed the old man's chest and neck, then slowly sliced downwards. I planted plants in people a few times in the past. The seeds of those plants would absorb the life force in a person's body and grow through their flesh and blood. All the people I planted those plants in them were in great pain, Su Ming said unhurriedly. The old man did not move, as if he did not hear anything. It was as if he was still in deep sleep. The immortals can possess others. That's why you don't care about the torture of your physical body. The small sword in Su Ming's hand had already sliced open a wound the size of a palm on the old man's chest. Blood flowed out, but the old man did not care about it. If that's the case, then let's see how strong you are. As Su Ming spoke calmly, he put away the small virescent sword and tapped the old man's wound with 2 fingers. Immediately, a strong gust of wind charged into the old man's body through the wound. That gust of wind was the wind that belonged to Su Ming as the wind berserker. It swept through the old man's flesh and blood, tearing at his organs nonstop. The pain caused by it made the old man tremble viciously. His eyes flew open, and they were bloodshot as he glared at Su Ming. "Why do you keep calling me Destiny?" Su Ming looked at the old man and asked flatly. "Little bastard, if you have any abilities, then use them. I'm not even afraid of death, so why would I be afraid of your little tricks? I'm not going to tell you what you want to know. If you really want to know, then go ahead and search my soul. But with your power as a soul formation cultivator, even if I'm as weak as I am right now, you won't be able to search my soul." The old man endured the pain in his body and grinned coldly with gritted teeth. Yet even though he looked strong, in truth, his fear towards the future was incredibly strong. Power outage, and power outage again. It lasted for 2 consecutive days, and he was about to go mad. He was about to go mad. Mutant River's electricity industry was going to go to hell. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Achidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 536. Detion's clone was destroyed, and the servant he placed in the land of berserkers to keep an eye on Su Ming was also captured. All of this caused Su Ming's fate to change drastically. All of this was the source of the old man's fear. He understood many things, but the more he understood, the more terrified he became. The only thing he could rely on right then was the fact that Su Ming had yet to recover his true memories. "I have enough patience. If you really don't want to talk, then so be it." Su Ming pressed 2 of his fingers against the old man's chest once again, and booming sounds immediately came from the old man's body. Right before his eyes, vortexes appeared under his skin. Those vortexes exploded as they spun rapidly, and whirlwinds swept out from within. This pain made the old man tremble, and large droplets of sweat fell from his forehead. "I don't need to know everything from you. What I want is to torture you endlessly. Honestly, there's not much clear hatred between us. Why do you have to do this?" Su Ming shook his head and lifted his right hand to swing at the old man. Immediately, the whirlwinds in the old man's body became even more brutal and swept up his organs, as if they were trying to turn his insides into mush. This feeling of being torn apart made the old man let out shrill screams of pain. These screams of pain continued for most of the night under the bright moon outside the cave abode, causing all the fated kin in the valley to hear them clearly. When the sky gradually brightened, the screams of pain gradually became weaker. Su Ming looked at the old man who was still trembling before him, then lifted his right hand to form a seal and pointed forward. Immediately, Han Mountain Bell manifested, and once it enveloped the old man, bell chimes reverberated in the air. To the others, those bell chimes were only loud bangs, but to the old man in the bell, they were deafening, as if there were countless people roaring at the same time. It made his head ring, and his body trembled even more violently. In fact, his flesh and blood were being torn apart, and his bones were about to shatter. "I'll give you enough time to think about it," Su Ming said slowly. He no longer bothered himself with the old man, but instead closed his eyes calmly and immersed himself in nourishing his nascent divinity. His nascent divinity had only appeared for a short period of time. If he wanted to bring out the full power of his divine sense, he would need some time to nourish it. Time trickled by as Su Ming nurtured his nascent divinity. In the blink of an eye, a month went by. During that month, all the fated kin in the valley could occasionally hear bell chimes and shrill screams of pain. Su Ming was no longer just using strong gusts of wind to torture the old man. Instead, he used lightning arts, fire berserker flames, and curse arts. This was not a one-time use, but a gradual progression. Once the other party had adapted to the wind tier, he would add in lightning to penetrate their flesh and meridians, making them endure a purgatory that was like a heavenly tribulation. When the old man was already used to the lightning and wind tearing at him, Su Ming added the fire berserker's flames to burn him from inside out, destroy his veins, and torture his flesh and blood, causing the old man to feel a pain that made him wish he was dead. He wanted to die, but he could not, because Su Ming had not completely broken the curse in his body. He had left some of it in him, and it could continuously weaken him. He could not self-destruct, and he could not die. Han Mountain bells rumbling also caused the old man to suffer a pain that he had never experienced in his life, a pain that made him feel as if he was submerged in hell. If Tai Mu had not returned, then this torture and Su Ming's nascent divinity's nourishment would have continued, and he would not be able to walk out of his cave abode within a short period of time. In the end, Tai Mu still could not escape death. On this day, when a light drizzle started falling from the sky outside during dusk, he closed his eyes. Su Ming had tried to save him, but Tai Mu, who was already at the end of his rope, no longer had any hope of saving him. Rain poured down. It was not rare to see rain in the world of Nine, and once it appeared, it would last for several months. The entire world would be obscured by the rain, and Su Ming could not see too far into the distance. The hundreds of fated kin in the valley all walked out of their cave abodes. They stood at the bottom of the valley and looked at Tai Mu, who was covered by the rain by his tribesmen. He had his eyes closed, and his expression was calm. He did not seem to be in too much pain. Instead, he felt as if he had been released. It was quiet all around. Even if there were sounds of crying, they were drowned out by the pouring rain. Su Ming also walked out of his cave abode and stood beside Tai Mu's corpse. As he looked at the familiar face before him, memories of the past surfaced in his mind. He might not have had much contact with Tai Mu, but he could still be considered an old friend. Su Ming had seen plenty of deaths, but this time, it was slightly different. As he looked at Tai Mu, the scenes of him fighting against him in the past appeared before his eyes. Nan Gonghen stood beside Su Ming with grief on his face. He had gone through this sort of thing multiple times during the past 15 years. He originally thought that he could become numb to it, but at that moment, he realized that he could not become numb to it. How could he become numb to it? Senior Tai Mu could have gone out in the past, but to let his tribe leave first, the rune crumbled and he could not leave. Over the past 15 years, the other seniors died one by one, and 5 years ago, Senior Tai Mu was the only ladder shaman left, and now he has also passed away, Nan Gonghen whispered softly in anguish. There was a young man kneeling beside Tai Mu's corpse. That young man's face was filled with grief. He was the boy Nan Gonghen had brought with him in the past. He had lost his right arm, and as he knelt on the ground, tears fell from his eyes. Nan Gonghen remained silent for a moment before he spoke languidly. Send Senior Tai Mu off. As he spoke, all the fated kin around him knelt down and worshipped him with grief on their faces. The rain was cold as it fell on their bodies, but no one avoided it. 2 fated kin walked out from around Tai Mu and carried his corpse on their shoulders. Then they walked into the distance along the path in the valley. The young man followed behind them with tears falling from his eyes. Nan Gonghen cast a glance at Su Ming and also walked in the same direction. In silence, Su Ming walked into the depths of the valley as the fated kin knelt down and worshipped him while facing the rain. The beast bone altar was located in the depths of the valley. It was also the burial ground for all the fated kin who had died during the past 15 years. Under the haze of the rain, the eerie white bones and the stone tablets with words on them didn't give off a ghastly aura, but a strong sense of sorrow. Su Ming did not have a deep impression of that grief, but every single time Nan Gong Hen came to this place, his heart would feel as if it had been pierced deeply. Once Nan Gong Hen buried Tai Mu and set up a stone monument on his grave. He carved his name and the fated kin's name on it. Once he finished carving down all his achievements in his life, Nan Gong Hen bowed quietly and left with grief in his heart. Su Ming swept his gaze across the altar. The rain became heavier, and in the haze, he could vaguely see the countless heroic souls returning to dust after protecting the people in the valley for the past 15 years. Tai Mu's death turned into grief that surrounded all the fated kin's hearts, causing all of them to become quiet for the next few days. As time passed by, the rain outside grew heavier. The sound of the rain falling continued, and the rain fog covered the entire area. The haze became increasingly indistinct, as if it was connecting the sky and earth, turning into a curtain of rain. Su Ming remained in his cave abode and listened to the pitter-patter of rain outside as he continued immersing himself in his meditation. He continued torturing Di Tian's servant without stopping. Tai Mu's death did not affect him too much, and neither did the grief that surrounded this place. After all, to him, this was not the place where he had lived for the past 15 years. There were not many memories of this place left behind. However, for some unknown reason, there was a depressing feeling in his heart. When one dies, they return to their home, and their bones are buried in a foreign land. Even a ladder shaman can't decide whether he lives or dies. He's still all right. At least he knows where his home is, and he also knows where the path to his home is. But where's my home? Just where is Dark Mountain? Perhaps Dark Mountain isn't my true home either. The elder once told me that I have to go to Berserker's Realm Mountain, Su Ming mumbled, and a dazed look appeared in his eyes. The things he saw in Dark Mountain appeared before his eyes, and they gradually became indistinct. Time passed by once again, and another month went by. The nourishment of Su Ming's nascent divinity slowly reached completion during these 2 months. As the nourishment of his nascent divinity came to an end, his divine sense also reached its peak. Once he spread it out, he might not be able to cover an area of 1 million lis, but he could still sense the Crimson Dragon, the poison corpse in Berserker Soul Realm, and Yao Yunhai's puppet. On this day, Su Ming's expression was grave as he sat cross-legged. He slowly spread his divine sense outwards, and as it spread in all directions, he placed his focus on sensing the Crimson Dragon, the puppet, and the poison corpse. Gradually, his expression turned dark. His divine sense covered the entire area, causing Su Ming's will to spread out. As he called out to them, the first thing that responded to him was a wave of ripples that came from the west. That ripple was incredibly weak. The instant it touched Su Ming's divine sense, his mind became clouded, and a vague picture flashed past his mind. In that picture was a gigantic palace. That palace was built on a mountain, and there were 8 gigantic statues within it. At the center of the statues was a skeleton kneeling on one knee. Its limbs were shackled, and it was nailed deep into the ground. The thing that responded to Su Ming's ripples was not the statue, neither was it the skeleton. Instead, it was a picture that had been drawn on the ground where the skeleton was. The picture was protruding out and circling around the ground. It was the Crimson Dragon that had shrunk down a lot. However, its color was no longer crimson red. It had become much duller, and pain could be seen on its face. It did not move, and if anyone took a closer look, they would find that the 8 statues were standing on the Crimson Dragon's picture as if they were suppressing it. As for the skeleton's chains that were nailed to the ground, it was also where the Crimson Dragon's head was. The picture in Su Ming's head flashed, and once it showed up, it disappeared without a trace. Soon after, a new picture appeared. That picture was of a swamp, and in the depths of that swamp was a pair of green eyes that shone in the darkness. A low roar seemed to travel out, and the picture disappeared. Su Ming's eyes flew open, and a chilling glint shone within them. Spirits of Nine. He stood up abruptly. Once he left his divine sense on the ground, he took a step out of the cave abode and disappeared in an instant. 1. I'm not familiar with the input method for the computers in the internet cafe. I'm not familiar with the vocabulary either. I have to search for every 10 words. I'm so angry that I want to smash the keyboard. It's useless even if I import or export. My thoughts short-circuited, and I write really slowly. I'm stuck every 10 words. I have the urge to start cursing. 2. There's an event in YY tonight. I'll go around 8. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 537. No fated kin in the valley noticed Su Ming's departure. He might have disappeared, but the wisp of divine sense he left in this place allowed him to sense everything in this place. If anything happened while he was away, he could warp and use the shortest amount of time possible to rush back. As for the Crimson Dragon, the faint ripples of pain coming from its body made thick anger burn in Su Ming's heart. The Crimson Dragon might have been created by Hong Luo, but it had returned without any hesitation once it saw Su Ming during the treasure gambling event in the world of Nine, which was a telling sign of its loyalty. It stayed by Su Ming's side all the way until he stepped into the Candle Dragon's carcass, and the Crimson Dragon continued waiting outside until something unexpected happened. Su Ming could already imagine all of this. This so-called accident was definitely connected to the old spirit of Nine he had rented in the past. He had to save the Crimson Dragon. Even if he had experienced the strength of the spirits of Nine in the past, as the Crimson Dragon's master, Su Ming could not give up on it due to danger. Because he could not find his home, Su Ming valued relationships. Because his family was not around, Su Ming valued relationships. There was no relationship between him and the Crimson Dragon, but since it was loyal to him, Su Ming would not give up on it out of fear. Spirits of Nine. Su Ming charged forward in midair and turned into a long arc. A freezing glare shone in his eyes, and as he lifted his right hand, Han Mountain Bell manifested on his palm. His gaze fell on the bell, and in silence, Su Ming looked at the strand of hair of the first god of berserkers on his finger. There was not much of it left, but with a resolute look on his face, he traveled even faster. Once he finished nourishing his nascent divinity, his speed became much faster than before, especially when he used the art of warping. The long arc that shot through the air would occasionally disappear and reappear in the world even further away. After several hours, Su Ming arrived at a swamp from the Fated Kin's Valley. This swamp did not exist 15 years ago, but by then it covered an area of several hundreds of thousands of feet. Occasionally, bubbles would pop up from the swamp, and once they burst, they would turn into a layer of green fog that surrounded the swamp, causing all those who got closer to it to see that it was shrouded in fog. Su Ming did not go to the land of spirits of Nine rashly. Instead, he came to this place. This was the place where the poisoned corpse in the Berserker Soul realm was located in the picture in his divine sense. If he wanted to go to the spirits of Nine, then Su Ming had to make the strongest preparations possible. After all, he had experienced just how powerful the spirits of Nine were in the past. At this moment, he was standing in mid-air above the swamp. He lowered his head, and a golden light flashed in his eyes. His gaze pierced through the fog below and sank into the swamp. A familiar wave came from the swamp. At the same time, a muffled roar suddenly reverberated in the air, as if it had come from the swamp. When it shook the fog in the area, there was a hint of brutality in that roar, as if it was incredibly displeased with Su Ming's divine sense. 15 years of rare freedom has given birth to a new consciousness in you. You dare to see me and not come out. I could capture you when you were still alive, and now that you've gained new consciousness, you're still the same, Su Ming said flatly. He lifted his right hand and pushed down on the swamp on the ground. Golden light shone brilliantly on Su Ming's body, and a huge force shot out from his right hand, charging straight into the swamp. Muffled booming sounds reverberated in the air, and the mark of a gigantic palm sunk into the swamp. That palm was created by Su Ming's force. As the swamp trembled and the palm continued sinking downwards, low roars came from the swamp with increasing intensity. After a moment, when the palm was about several hundreds of feet down and the swamp seemed to have sunk in deeply, a green palm shot out from the swamp. Once it crashed into Su Ming's palm that was sinking downwards, it let out a shocking bang. The swamp looked as if it had collapsed. As a large amount of mud splashed everywhere, the puppet Su Ming was searching for still did not come out. It was as if it had been avoiding him, and this was an instinctive action. "You're not coming out, huh?" A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He spread out his divine sense at full power and charged into the swamp. He swiftly charged in, and as he swept his gaze through the area, he saw countless human and beast skeletons. He also saw a figure squatting in the depths of the swamp. Its eyes shone with a dark light, and it was roaring. Su Ming did not hesitate. His divine sense charged towards the figure, and in an instant he enveloped it. He immediately noticed that the mark he had left in the past was still there, but it was incredibly dull. Clearly, it had been frequently attacked by the puppet over the years. "Poison corpse return," Su Ming whispered. With his divine sense, he guided the mark he had left behind in the past, and the figure immediately started trembling viciously. Its roars became even louder, and it started moving swiftly in the depths of the swamp, as if it wanted to avoid Su Ming's divine sense. However, the strength of Su Ming's divine sense was not something that the puppet could avoid or hide from. After a moment, the figure seemed to have endured the pain. As it roared, a murderous aura appeared, and it charged towards the surface of the swamp without regard for anything else. A green figure rushed out of the swamp, and with a foul stench and the aura of corpses, it charged towards Su Ming in the span of a breath. Su Ming stood in midair with a calm expression on his face. At the instant the green figure closed in on him, he lifted his right hand and swung it forward. Immediately, a large amount of lightning arcs appeared out of nowhere and swam swiftly around his body. There was also a large amount of lightning arcs flashing in the sky as the drizzle continued falling. As Su Ming swung his arm, the lightning arcs left his body and gathered towards the green figure from all around him. In the blink of an eye, they crashed into each other, and a thunderous rumble rang out. From the distance, the green figure looked as if it could attract lightning itself. An endless amount of lightning dragons crawled out of nowhere around it, and all of them came crashing down on it with loud rumbles. The green figure let out a muffled groan, but did not care about the lightning bolts crashing down on it. With lightning sparks all over its body, it did not stop moving. In an instant, when it was less than 30 feet away from Su Ming, it coughed out a mouthful of poisonous fog. That poisonous fog was black and green, and it spread out as if it had erupted, instantly enveloping Su Ming within it. Immediately, the spot where Su Ming was previously was surrounded by poisonous fog. That poison was so strong that it looked as if it had a life of its own, and it continued spreading through the area. The green figure let out a prideful roar, and a murderous glint appeared in its eyes. Just as it was about to rush into the fog, the air behind it that was devoid of fog distorted, and Su Ming walked out. The moment he walked out, the green figure immediately noticed him. Just as it was about to turn around, Su Ming let out a cold harumph and lifted his right hand to point at the green figure through the air. With that one tap, a piercing golden light erupted from the tip of Su Ming's finger. That golden light instantly became the strongest light in the area, and it landed on the green figure's body. The green figure let out a pained scream and quickly retreated, intending to shrink back into the poisonous fog. Yet before it could do so, Su Ming waved his arm, and a whirlwind appeared. That whirlwind spun rapidly and stirred up an endless amount of violent gusts of wind. It entered the fog slightly faster than the green figure, and as it moved, the large amount of poisonous fog moved along with the whirlwind, causing the green figure to fail in its attempt to fuse into the poisonous fog. The green figure came to a halt, then turned around and started roaring at Su Ming. It was also at that moment that its appearance was revealed. It was a person covered in green fur. That green fur was like spikes and looked incredibly sharp, and it covered his entire body. His eyes were shining with a green light, and he was glaring at Su Ming. There was even a tuft of white fur at the center of his brows. As he breathed, black and green poisonous fog continuously exhaled before it was sucked back in, forming a cycle. Su Ming could still vaguely tell that this person was the poisoned corpse in the Berserker soul realm. No one knew what sort of serendipity he had obtained during the past 15 years to turn him into this. The ripples of power from his body were much stronger than in the past, and by the looks of it, he was equivalent to a powerful berserker in the middle stage of the Berserker soul realm. It was especially so for the poisonous fog. It was even more shocking, or else Su Ming would not have chosen a warp to avoid it. With just one glance, he could tell that besides the small snake's poison, there was also another unknown poison in the poisonous fog. The fusion of two different poisons caused this poison to be terrifying. Once the poisoned corpse roared at Su Ming, he no longer attacked, but instead charged towards a swamp on the ground. Su Ming's expression was calm, but there was a whirlwind spinning around him. That whirlwind could chase away all poisonous fog. He watched the poisoned corpse rushing towards the swamp, but did not stop him. Instead, he lifted his right hand and seized the air. Immediately, a gigantic spiked club manifested in his hand. Almost at the instant the poisoned corpse rushed into the swamp, Su Ming lifted the spiked club in his right hand. That spiked club instantly grew bigger, and once it was nearly 1,000 feet long, Su Ming rammed it into the swamp with a single swing. A muffled boom that shook the entire area reverberated in the air. The instant the spiked club landed in the swamp, a powerful tremor covered the entire swamp, causing a powerful rebound to erupt from within. That power spread out in an instant, causing the poisoned corpse that had rushed in to be bounced out of the swamp against his will. At the instant he was bounced up, Su Ming closed in on him like a bolt of lightning. He tapped a few times through the air with his right index finger, and all of them landed on the poisoned corpse's chest, causing the poisoned corpse to continuously retreat with terror on his face. If I can turn you into a puppet, then I can naturally destroy you as well. But since you've gained intelligence, then make your own decision now. Will you continue following me, or will you truly die? Su Ming stopped moving and enveloped the poisoned corpse with his divine sense. He had sent a few wisps of his own power of berserker bones into the poisoned corpse's body just then, and with just a single thought, that power would completely erupt within the poisoned corpse. The poisoned corpse let out a maddened roar in fear, and the poisoned fog around his body spread out swiftly. When it enveloped his body, he was just about to flee, but Su Ming smiled coldly. He did not chase after him, but with a single thought, a booming sound immediately came from within the fog. Once that booming sound rang out 6 times in succession, Su Ming waved his arm, and a whirlwind spread out from his body. It swept up the fog and disappeared, revealing the poisoned corpse in midair. His body was broken, his eyes were dull, and green blood was flowing out of his mouth. His face was dispirited, and as he looked at Su Ming, the terror in his eyes grew stronger. Su Ming looked at the poisoned corpse and said slowly, "Will you die, or will you obey me?" A conflicted look appeared on the poisoned corpse's face. After some time, he lowered his head and knelt down before Su Ming. He let out whimpering sounds and simply allowed Su Ming's divine sense to rush into his body and fuse with the mark he had left in the past. Su Ming no longer bothered himself with the poisoned corpse and looked in the direction of the spirits of Nine. He took a step forward, and the poisoned corpse followed behind him obediently. Occasionally, he would turn his head back to look at the swamp, as if he was reluctant to leave. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 538. In fact, before Su Ming could even take a few steps forward, the poisoned corpse behind him let out a low growl at him, still unwilling to leave. That growl no longer contained any murderous intent, but was conveying another message. Su Ming turned his head around and cast the poisoned corpse a glance before nodding his head. Immediately, the poisoned corpse's spirits lifted, and he turned around to charge down into the swamp. His entire body sank into the swamp. Su Ming stood in midair and started wading at a moderate pace. After the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn, the green mist that lingered above the swamp began to churn violently. It was as if the swamp was emitting a suction force, and the mist was sucked into the swamp. After a while, a whirlpool appeared in the swamp. The whirlpool spun faster and faster, and in the end, the poisoned corpse rushed out of the whirlpool. Su Ming's pupils shrank. He could clearly see a curved dagger in the poisoned corpse's hand. That dagger was green and shiny, and Su Ming could not tell what material it was made of. There was also an ancient presence coming from it. It was clear that this dagger had existed for a long time. Thinking back to the history of the world of Nine, this dagger was definitely an ancient treasure. It was just that he did not know how the poisoned corpse had obtained it. However, it could be assumed that it was precisely because of the existence of this dagger that caused the poisoned corpse's poisonous fog to change. As if he was worried that Su Ming would take the dagger away, the instant the poisoned corpse flew out with the dagger, he immediately stabbed it into his chest. Su Ming saw that once the dagger was stabbed into the poisoned corpse's body, it melted and crawled into his body before disappearing. Pain appeared on the poisoned corpse's face. He struggled for a long time before he managed to pull himself out. The injuries on his body instantly healed, and his eyes shone brightly, becoming even brighter than before. Su Ming looked at the poisoned corpse, and a question rose in his heart. If this dagger had such an effect, then why didn't the poisoned corpse bring it out earlier? The poisoned corpse might have gained intelligence, but he could only express simple emotions. He could not communicate with Su Ming. Su Ming could not get an answer to this question, but he remembered it and observed it in secret as well as kept his guard up. However, this was not the time to look into it. Once Su Ming was certain that the brand he had left on the poisoned corpse's body had become stronger and that there was no problem controlling it, he averted his gaze and looked in the direction of the spirits of Nine. With one move, he charged forward. The poisoned corpse turned into a green light and followed closely behind. It's a pity that I'm still unable to find Yao Yunhai's puppet body, even after I covered it with my divine sense. Otherwise, my battle prowess would have reached its peak. Rain continued to pour down from the sky, and it covered a very large area of the world of Nine. When dusk arrived, a dense forest appeared before Su Ming as he charged forward in midair. He could vaguely see several mountains standing tall in the depths of the forest. There were also a large number of palaces surrounding them. In fact, Su Ming could even see numerous unmoving statues outside the palaces. It was as if everything in this place was in deep sleep. It was dead silent, and not a single sound could be heard. However, if Su Ming covered the entire place with his divine sense, he would be able to sense the crimson dragon letting out weak cries of pain. This was where the spirits of Nine resided, and also the place where he had sensed the fluctuations of the crimson dragon. Su Ming swept his gaze across the place, and eventually his eyes fell on one of the towering mountains. There was a palace at the top of that mountain, and that palace was where the pictures that had flashed through Su Ming's divine sense were. As he stared at the palace at the top of the mountain, Su Ming did not stop moving. His entire body shone with golden light, and he charged towards that place. Almost the instant Su Ming got closer, the unmoving stone statues outside the halls at the foot of the mountain before him started recovering, as if they had melted. Waves of powerful presence spread out, causing the rain falling from the sky to freeze for a moment and float away from the area, unable to descend. It caused the clouds in the sky to become indistinct, as if they were covered by that presence, and they looked as if they were distorting from the indistinct air. All trespassers in the spirits of Nine Yin's territory will be killed. A ghastly voice reverberated in the air. There was a powerful killing intent within that voice, as if it contained a law, and it was enough to make all those who heard it feel their hearts tremble. Su Ming's entire body instantly shone with a piercing golden light, and cracking sounds reverberated within his body. This was the first time he displayed his full power ever since he came out of the undying and imperishable world. Even when he killed the golden thread sacred bat, Su Ming had not used his full strength. Yet at that moment, as the golden light shone on his entire body and the cracking sounds traveled forth, even Su Ming's hair seemed to have turned gold. Dark Mountain's berserker mark appeared on his face, and his nascent divinity spread out from behind him to turn into a gigantic shadow. That shadow looked similar to him, but it was several dozens of feet tall. Once it manifested, it formed a seal with one hand, and with an aloof gaze, it followed Su Ming. This was his nascent divinity transformation stage. It was a pity that Yao Yunhai's body was not around, or else Su Ming's power as an immortal would be able to bring forth an even greater power. However, if he manifested this way, he would still be able to bring forth a rather strong power. The poison corpse was right at the back of the group. A murderous glint appeared in his eyes, and as he breathed, black and green fog surrounded his body. As it surrounded him, he looked like a phantom. Su Ming charged forward. There were 8 palaces between this place and the hall in the mountain. There were numerous stone statues outside each of these 8 palaces, and right then, the stone statue of the first palace, which was located at the outermost layer, had awakened. There was also an invisible seal in this place that prevented people from warping. It was as if the space in this place had been compressed so tightly that there was not a single gap between them. If a person tried to warp forcefully, then there was a high possibility that right when their body disappeared, their flesh and blood would immediately shatter not too far away. Su Ming's expression was aloof, and his eyes were resolute. As he charged forward, he instantly arrived at the first palace that blocked his path. The moment he closed in, the numerous stone statues outside the first palace woke up. All of them looked at Su Ming coldly, and almost at the instant he arrived, they let out low roars. Su Ming let out a cold harumph. The instant the spirits of 9 closed in on him, a large amount of lightning arcs immediately appeared around him. At the same time, a large amount of lightning also appeared in the rain falling from the sky. Su Ming lifted his right hand and swung his arm, and an endless amount of lightning descended with loud rumbles. From the distance, it looked as if lightning had rained down on the first palace. An endless amount of thunder rumbled, and in the dusk, the entire place was instantly illuminated. All of the lightning had been brought forth by Su Ming using the lightning crystal of inheritance. Lightning covered the entire place, causing the incoming spirits of 9 to freeze for a moment. At the instant they froze, Su Ming had already arrived at the main gate of the first palace. Just as he was about to take a step forward, a roar came from within the palace, and it was soon followed by a figure of 100-something feet tall charging out from within. Before it even got close, a powerful, mighty pressure forced down on Su Ming's mind. Su Ming did not stop moving. He clenched his right hand into a fist and hurled it towards the incoming gigantic figure. That gigantic figure also clenched its fist and charged towards him. Their fists crashed into each other in an instant. One of them was within the palace, and the other was outside it. Right in between them was the door. One of them was 100-something feet tall, and the other was incredibly small compared to him. One of them had a ferocious look on his face, and the other had an aloof expression. Time seemed to have frozen at that instant. The light from the lightning illuminated everything. At the instant their fists collided, the body of the armored spirit of 9 in the hall trembled violently. The armor on his body shattered into pieces with a bang, revealing a face that was like a withered tree. He even coughed out a large mouthful of blood as his body was sent tumbling backwards. He staggered a few steps back in succession. Su Ming did not retreat even a single bit. With one move, he moved past the first palace and charged straight towards the second palace. "Who are you?" The man from the first palace's shocked voice traveled forth from behind him. The physical strength of the spirits of Nine had always been something they were proud of. Even if their levels of cultivation were about the same, with the strength of their physical bodies, they could still suppress their opponents with brute force. Yet during that instant just now, the shock in the man's heart could not be described with words. He could clearly sense that Su Ming had not cast any divine abilities, but was just like him, using his physical strength. In this sort of situation, he had practically lost completely. "I am Su Ming, and I've come here to retrieve the spirit you spirits of Nine are holding." The instant Su Ming stepped into the second palace, the stone statues outside the second palace melted. All of them had dark expressions on their faces, and without a single word, they charged towards Su Ming. This time, Su Ming did not attack. The one who attacked was the poison corpse. That corpse let out a low roar and rushed out. Black and green poisonous fog spread out from his body, and in the blink of an eye, it covered the entire area. Su Ming knew that if he wanted to save the Crimson Dragon, then he had to be fast. He had to use his fastest speed to rush to the place where the Crimson Dragon was sealed. He did not stop moving and stepped straight into the second palace's door. At the instant he arrived, a man walked out of the second palace. That man held a long spear in his hand, and the moment he walked out, he thrust that spear towards Su Ming's face, bringing with it a piercing sound as it sliced through the air, and it was deafening to the ears. It was as if he had been preparing for this spear since a long time ago, and he was charging forward at that moment. When the spear was about to touch Su Ming, he lifted his right hand, and Han Mountain Bell immediately manifested on his right hand, as if his fist had turned into that bell. The instant it crashed into the long spear, a violent bell chime rang through the sky and earth. The man holding the long spear shuddered, and the long spear in his hand shattered inch by inch. He took a few steps back, and blood trickled out of the corners of his mouth. Su Ming did not hesitate. With one step, he moved past the palace and charged towards the third palace. Yet the instant he stepped into the third palace, not only did all the statues outside the third palace wake up, even the guardian of the palace walked out of the palace with a long spear in his hand. When he lifted it, all the spirits of Nine in the palace lifted their long spears and threw them out at the same time. Piercing whistles rang through the air as they charged towards Su Ming. Su Ming's expression remained as calm as ever. In the face of the numerous long spears charging towards him, he lifted his left hand and pushed forward gently. "My left hand represents the past. Just like all of you, search for the traces of time and go backwards," Su Ming whispered softly. At the instant he said those words, the numerous long spears charging towards him through the air stopped moving forward, but started moving backwards. At the same time, the spirit of Nine from the third palace took a step back before his foot even landed on the ground. As if his movement had been reversed, he took a step back. The visual shock formed by that one step backwards was enough to shock all those who saw it. Su Ming moved like a bolt of lightning and leaped past the third palace, stepping right outside the fourth palace. Strangely enough, the spirit of Nine from the fourth palace did not wake up. Only a 300-something feet tall man stood there and looked at Su Ming with a complicated expression. "Are you going to stop me as well?" Su Ming asked calmly. "The blackout will continue, and I heard that it will continue tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 539. He had mastered the fusion of the past and future, and destiny was contained within the front and back of his palm. This art that could turn back time was Destiny's style that Su Ming had come to understand during the 2 months he isolated himself and nourished his nascent divinity. It was just like his creation, the third style after Berserker Obliteration and Extreme Speed Destiny's past. This style might seem simple, as if it could change the flow of time, but in truth, that was not the case. Su Ming still could not truly do this. What he could do was to fuse his understanding towards the past into the wind, just like the wind's memories, and use it to reverse time. If he became destiny, he would be able to execute this style to its greatest extent. He had yet to transform it, and when he used it, he could only reverse time for an instant. However, even if it was just for an instant, it was enough to stir up a great deal of shock among the spirits of Nine. This sort of divine ability had already reached an incredibly abstruse level. At that moment, the 300-something feet tall man standing outside the fourth palace felt this way in his heart. He looked at Su Ming, and there was no need for him to hide the complicated look on his face. His name was Li Hua. My name is Li Hua. I am willing to serve you according to the alliance between my people and the shaman tribe. Su Ming was also looking at the man before him, and in his ears, he felt as if he could hear the words spoken in the past. In the face of Su Ming's question, the struggle on Li Hua's face became even more intense. He lifted his head swiftly, and a resolute look appeared in his eyes. There are things that a man cannot do. For personal reasons, I shouldn't stop you, but for my people, I must stop you. You saved my life, this is... The man lifted his right hand swiftly and seized the air. Immediately, a gigantic battle axe appeared out of thin air with a loud bang. Once he held it in his hand, he placed it on the ground. The ground trembled and fine cracks spread out with loud cracking sounds. It's my fault. Li Hua let go of his right hand, and his battle axe stood upright on the ground. He turned around and struck his chest with his right hand. He staggered a few steps back and coughed out a huge mouthful of blood. His helmet shattered, revealing his face that looked like a withered tree, and he opened up a path. Go! Li Hua gritted his teeth and growled. At this moment, the other spirits of Nine also slowly woke up. Each of them looked at Li Hua and remained silent. Su Ming wrapped his fist in his palm towards Li Hua, and a complicated look appeared on his face. With one move, he leapt up, intending to rush into the fifth palace. But the instant he did so, the other spirits of Nine in the palace lifted their heads. Let him go. Li Hua's voice appeared once again, and there was a tone of farewell in his voice. He might have only known Su Ming for a short period of time, but everything that had happened during that short period of time was something that Li Hua would never forget. He did not manage to complete Su Ming's final request in the past. He only brought the girl back to Shaman City. As for the boy, he ran into an accident on the way. This matter was something that he felt guilty about. Su Ming turned into a long arc, and in the blink of an eye, he left the fourth palace and rushed into the fifth palace. The instant he entered the courtyard of the fifth palace and was still in midair, a powerful presence crashed into his face. There were 9 gigantic stone statues in the courtyard of the fifth palace, and at that moment, these 9 stone statues woke up one by one. They looked at Su Ming coldly, and at the same time, a spirit of Nine also walked out of the fifth palace. That person looked to be about middle-aged, and his withered face did not seem to contain a hint of emotion. Stop! The middle-aged spirit of Nine spoke slowly, and there was a decaying air to his voice. The instant he spoke, a powerful presence erupted from the 9 spirits of Nine in the courtyard, and each of them had the power of a ladder shaman. It was especially so for the middle-aged spirit of Nine who walked out of the palace. Even if he had not reached the level of an end shaman, he could still be considered to have reached the peak of ladder shaman. These spirits of Nine were enough to trap Su Ming in this place and prevent him from going to the sixth palace within a short period of time. Almost the instant the spirits of Nine in the courtyard brought out their full power and lifted their heads to charge towards Su Ming, who was in midair, a glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. The small snake on his shoulder lifted its head and let out a piercing howl. As it howled, the small snake charged out and twisted its body in midair. Immediately, a gigantic, illusory shadow of the candle dragon manifested in the sky. The candle dragon roared and opened its mouth wide to sweep downwards. At the same time, Su Ming turned into a long arc and shot through the candle dragon's illusory shadow to charge forward. With the candle dragon that was the small snake blocking the spirits of Nine in the palace, Su Ming managed to gain an instant of time, allowing him to charge out of the fifth palace and arrive at the sixth palace. The small snake's power as the candle dragon might not be weak, but it had not fully grown. It could only trap the spirits of 9 in the fifth palace for a short period of time. It could not last for long. Su Ming knew that he did not have much time left. With his full speed, the instant he stepped into the sixth palace, 7 presences that were equivalent to those at the peak of ladder shamans charged towards him, causing him to not have a single chance to dodge or retreat in midair. When he saw the 7 presences closing in on him, a glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He lifted his right hand, and the wind crystal of inheritance in his body erupted with all its might. A vortex appeared around him, and as it spun, a burning sensation appeared, as if it had turned into a vortex that contained a high temperature. Once that wind appeared, Su Ming pointed his right hand toward the sky. Lunar burial. The instant those 2 words left his mouth, a gigantic vortex of wind appeared in the sky as well. That wind was different from the high temperature on the ground. It contained a ghastly chill. All of this might have seemed to have happened over a long period of time, but in truth, it only happened in an instant. The freezing vortex in the sky and the hot wind on the ground crashed into each other as they continued tumbling about in the air. As they did so, a gust of wind that was much stronger than the wind from Sun Genesis erupted out of nowhere. That wind howled, and it even had the power to blow away all life force. This was lunar burial, the second style of wind separation, lunar burial. Under that gust of wind, the 7 powerful spirits of 9 were like corpses within it. Their bodies continued withering away, and a large amount of their life force also disappeared in an instant. That gust of wind howled and swept in all directions, causing Su Ming's long hair to dance in the wind, his robes to flutter, and his eyes to look like a dark abyss. However, this was the 6th palace in the territory of the spirits of 9. Almost at the instant the gust of wind appeared, an old man walked out of the 6th palace, and when Su Ming looked over, he found that he was also someone he was familiar with. That old man was the person Su Ming had rented in the past, the one who possessed power equivalent to an N shaman. He was also the one who had somehow taken away the Crimson Dragon, causing it to be sealed in this place. There is also a complicated look on his face, but it was different from Li Hua, who had opened up a path for him. He took a step forward, and, as the gust of wind swirled around him, he lifted his right hand and pointed forward. It was just like how this old man had helped Su Ming fight against the god of Shaman's Temple during the treasure gambling event all those years ago. Zhe Long Shun. Su Ming looked at the incoming finger as he stood in the gust of wind. At that moment, the 7 people who had just arrived revealed themselves, but they could not get close to Su Ming. They were fighting back with everything they had in the gust of wind. The strength of that gust of wind would not have been so great if Su Ming had cast it with his normal level of cultivation. But once he cast it with all his power in the bone sacrifice realm, he could bring out the power of the art of wind burial to its greatest extent. In the past, I was far from being your opponent. Today, let's see just how much of a difference there is between us. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes, and he took a step forward, walking out of the vortex formed by the wind of burial. He lifted his right hand, and with the finger art he had developed over the endless years in the undying and imperishable world, he used it to clash against the old spirit of 9's finger in midair and closed in on each other like lightning. In the past, Su Ming had been so weak in the old man's eyes that he could not even withstand a single blow. Right then, he already had the right to fight against this old man in a true battle. It's a pity that the timing isn't right. At the same time, Su Ming pointed forward. He changed his position slightly. He sighed in his heart, and that finger instantly crashed into the old man's finger, stirring up a shocking boom. In the midst of that boom, blood trickled down the corners of Su Ming's mouth. His body tumbled backwards, but due to the slight change in his position, he did not fall backwards. Instead, as if he was borrowing the old man's power, he charged towards the 7th palace. A shudder ran through the old spirit of 9's body. To him, Su Ming did not seem to have used his full power in that one attack. He was just borrowing the old man's power. When he saw Su Ming charging towards the seventh palace, a glint appeared in his eyes. Just as he was about to chase after him, the shadow of Su Ming's nascent divinity, which had been following behind him all this while, turned its head around swiftly. The instant Su Ming's nascent divinity turned his head around, he lifted his right hand and swung it towards the sky. With that one swing, a layer of blood swiftly spread out, and it looked as if the entire sky had swiftly turned into a blood-red hue. This was one of the more powerful arts in Hong Luo's arts, blood washing the heavens. It was difficult for those who cast this art with the power of the soul formation realm to bring out too much of its power. Even if they had to use up their nascent divinity, they could only cast half of its power. However, even if it was only half of its power, it still had the power to wash the place in blood. The sky was crimson red, as if a sea of blood had manifested in all directions. It appeared behind Su Ming, and as if blocking off his path, it blocked off the old spirit of Nine Yin's path. Once the sea of blood fused into Su Ming's nascent divinity, it charged towards the old spirit of Nine Yin. Su Ming did not turn his head back. With the power of that one finger, he used his nascent divinity to block off the old spirit of Nine Yin. All of this was so that he would not be trapped in the sixth palace. At that moment, he turned into a long arc, and, as he charged forward, he stepped into the courtyard of the seventh palace. His face was slightly pale. After all, that one finger contained power equivalent to that of an end shaman. If it was not because his physical body was incredibly strong and he had managed to withstand that attack, he might have immediately exploded. However, the spirit of Nine Yin's palaces were each stronger than the last. Even if there were only 2 palaces left before Su Ming and the palace in the mountain where the Crimson Dragon was sealed, these 2 palaces, the 7th and 8th palaces, would definitely be incredibly dangerous. But Su Ming did not regret it. A call came in the afternoon. A call finally came. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 540. At the instant he stepped into the courtyard of the 7th palace, Su Ming saw that there were only 5 statues in the courtyard. These 5 statues had already woken up, and the instant Su Ming appeared, they took a step forward simultaneously. The moment their foot landed, the ground trembled. Each of the 5 statues possessed powers similar to that of the 6 palaces' old Zheilong Shun. When they took a step forward together, a mighty pressure that seemed to be able to topple mountains and overturn seas instantly rushed towards Su Ming. Su Ming's body froze. Under that pressure, he felt as if his entire body was about to shatter. As he coughed out a mouthful of blood, he formed a seal with his right hand and pointed forward. Immediately, bell chimes reverberated in the air. Those bell chimes spread out, and Han Mountain Bell appeared before Su Ming, right before the 5 statues. As the seals on Su Ming's right hand changed, Han Mountain Bell grew larger. A roar traveled out, and as it reverberated through the 9 heavens, the 9-headed dragon manifested in midair above the 7th palace. At this moment, the heads of the 9-headed beast were howling as they charged towards the 5 powerful spirits of Nine Yin. However, every single one of these 5 spirits of Nine Yin was comparable to an end shaman. Their strength was unimaginable. Besides that, at the instant the 9-headed dragon appeared, an old man walked out from the main hall of the 7th palace. That old man was dressed in green robes. He might look like a withered tree, but he was not tall. There was not much difference between him and Su Ming. As he stood there, he looked incredibly small, but that insignificance was just a figment of his eyes. He looked at Su Ming coldly, and the instant he took a step forward, Su Ming felt as if the earth had trembled and the mountain swayed. It was as if the world had instantly darkened due to the old man's appearance. Su Ming sucked in a deep breath and lifted his right hand. His palm was facing downwards and the back of his hand was facing upwards. He lifted his left hand as well, but this time his palm was facing upwards and the back of his hand was facing downwards. The palm represents the past, and the back of the hand represents the future. The fusion of the past and the future is akin to a power that comes from the fusion of the past and the future when our palms touch each other. I call this power that fuses the past and the future destiny, Su Ming mumbled. Su Ming mumbled, and as he spoke, his left hand and right hand touched each other. His body immediately trembled and veins popped up on his face. His long hair danced madly in the air, and an illusion appeared behind him. Surprisingly, that phantom was a baby that did not cry or weep, and its eyes were completely gray, as if it was dead. The baby seemed to be looking at the sky and did not move. However, if one looked closely, one could see that there was resentment towards the heavens and earth in his gloomy expression. Almost at the instant the baby appeared, the air before Su Ming distorted, and a purple figure manifested. It was a man with purple hair, and his face was filled with grief, as if there was an endless amount of grief contained within it. He looked at the sky and seemed to be mumbling, but his words could not be heard clearly. Fusion destiny, first fusion. At the instant Su Ming said those words, the purple-haired man in front of him and the dull-eyed baby behind him immediately charged into his body and fused into it. At the instant they did so, Su Ming's body turned into a gigantic vortex. As it rotated with loud bangs, no one from the outside could see what was going on inside. However, this rotation did not last for long. Almost at the instant, the nine-headed dragon charged forward while roaring madly, and the old man in green robes from the seventh palace walked over. The vortex crumbled with a bang and started spreading outwards rapidly like a violent gust of wind. In midair, when the vortex disappeared, a pale-faced young man appeared before all the spirits of Nine. Half of his hair was purple, and the other half was white. The young man looked to be only 8 or 9 years old. Not only was his face pale, even the other parts of his skin were gray. He looked up at the sky, then slowly lowered his head. His gaze met the old man who had walked out from the seventh palace. The old man's footsteps came to an abrupt halt, and a strong sense of danger rose in his heart. In fact, he could even sense an ancient air within the teenager's eyes. "I only have 15 breaths." Su Ming, who had turned into a teenager, mumbled. This time, he had turned into destiny, and he could clearly feel the time limit. It was different from when he was in the undying and imperishable world. When he activated the fusion of the past and the future in the world outside, he only had 15 breaths. A glint appeared in his eyes, and without a hint of hesitation, Su Ming took a swift step towards the old man from the seventh palace. With that one step, his body looked as if he was still standing on the spot, but the old man who had walked out of the seventh palace lifted his right hand and swiftly pushed forward. With that one push, rumbling sounds reverberated in the air, and the air before the old man distorted. Su Ming walked out, and he did not stop. As he walked towards the old man, he lifted his right hand and seized the air. Immediately, a layer of purple light manifested on his right hand, and he pointed towards the old man. With that one finger, that layer of purple light charged towards the old man. A grave look appeared on the old man's face. Just as he was about to cast a divine ability to resist, Su Ming lifted his left hand and swung it in the air. Immediately, the old man shuddered, and, as if time was flowing backwards, he took a step back against his will. The divine ability he was about to cast was instantly interrupted, and he lifted his right hand, just like before. Shock and disbelief appeared in his eyes as he watched the layer of purple light closing in on him. Once it enveloped his entire body, a loud bang rang in the air. The old man coughed out blood, and his body tumbled backwards, but before he could retreat too far, Su Ming seized the air with his right hand. Immediately, the old man's feet and body changed once again. He took a few steps forward and returned to the state he was in before he was attacked by the purple light. In fact, even the purple light that had crashed into the old man's body tumbled backwards, as if what had happened just now had happened once again. Booming sounds reverberated in the air once again. The cycle repeated itself. In just a short instant, the old man went through this process of retreating and moving forward 13 times. He went through this sort of attack and reversal 13 times, and only when Su Ming walked past him and out of the 7th palace to head towards the 8th palace did the old man's body recover from the cycle of the past and the future. However, as he recovered, 13 loud bangs erupted from his body. Purple light surged into the sky and filled the entire area. Once those 13 bangs rang out, the old man coughed out a huge mouthful of blood. As he staggered, he turned his head around, and with a pale face, he looked at Su Ming in shock. He could clearly sense that if it had not been for the fact that Su Ming's killing intent had not been too strong, then if he had endured a little more of that cycle of the past and the future, it would have been difficult for him to escape death. This sort of slaughter, this sort of divine ability, and this sort of unbelievable transformation caused fear towards Su Ming to rise in the old man's heart for some unknown reason. He was not the only one who was terrified. The other 5 spirits of 9 were also terrified. At that moment, Su Ming was no longer Su Ming. He was Destiny. 7 breaths had passed since Destiny appeared until he walked into the 8th palace. When the 8th breath was over, Su Ming arrived at the 8th palace. There were only 3 statues in the 8th palace. At that moment, those 3 statues were rapidly recovering. In the blink of an eye, they woke up. At the same time, a cold harumph came from the 8th palace, and a foot walked out of it. Most of the person's body was hidden in the darkness of the palace, and as he took a step forward, he gradually revealed himself. However, all of this changed rapidly the moment Su Ming stepped into the 8th palace. As Su Ming, who now had half a head of white hair and another head of purple hair, walked forward, the 3 awakened statues immediately closed their eyes. Their recovered bodies started petrifying from their heads as Su Ming walked towards them. When Su Ming walked past them, the 3 powerful statues fell into a deep slumber once again, as if they were moving in reverse. The cold harumph that came from the 8th palace also started weakening. The foot that had taken a step forward also started moving backwards slowly. However, Su Ming could see that the foot was trembling, as if it was struggling with all its might. However, as Su Ming continued moving forward, that struggle eventually turned into powerlessness, and the foot completely retreated from the palace and disappeared. Su Ming walked past the 8th palace. Before him was the mountain that sealed the Crimson Dragon, and at the top of that mountain was the final palace where the Crimson Dragon was. The 9th palace in this place. At the instant Su Ming walked past the 8th palace and stepped on the mountain to stand outside the 9th palace, an illusion appeared on his body. Destiny's body gradually grew bigger, and in an instant he turned from the appearance of an 8 or 9-year-old into his current appearance. His hair color also returned to normal, but his face was still pale. Blood trickled out of the corners of his mouth. Clearly, Su Ming had to be incredibly compatible with Destiny's form when he cast it in the world outside. Outsider, you are the 4th person who managed to clear the 8 palaces and come to this place over the course of countless years. An ancient voice came from the 9th palace. The door to the palace opened slowly, allowing Su Ming to see the 8 statues and the skeleton pinned to the ground at the center of the palace. Under the skeleton was a crimson dragon that looked like a totem. The person who said those words was none other than the skeleton pinned to the ground. At that moment, the skeleton lifted his head slowly and looked towards Su Ming. The instant he lifted his head and Su Ming saw the skeleton, he immediately recognized that the appearance of the head was the exact same as the gigantic head propped up by the stone pillar in Shaman City all those years ago. Your divine ability just now was very powerful. If you could last for the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, then you could come and go as you please among the spirits of 9, and no one would be able to stop you. Even I would have to pay a huge price if I wanted to stop you. But clearly you can't do it. The skeleton looked at Su Ming, and there was an endless amount of wisdom in his eyes, along with an ancient look that had existed for an unknown amount of time. As the 4th person to clear the palace over the course of a long time, you have obtained our respect. Leave. This soul of earth and aura is very useful to our people. We will not give it to you." Su Ming remained silent. He did not speak, but he lifted his right hand slowly. There was a strand of hair on his finger that was showing signs of burning. A pressure that surpassed Su Ming's by an unknown amount was slowly spreading out from that strand of hair on his finger. The strength of that pressure instantly covered the entire area, causing the expressions of all the spirits of 9 to immediately change. It also made the eyes of the skeleton in the palace shine with a powerful glare. This presence belongs to the god of berserkers, Lai Shan Xiao. There seems to be one more chapter left, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 541. The skeleton in the 9th palace shuddered at that moment, causing the chains and nails around him to tremble as well. The mountain also started trembling faintly. He stared at Su Ming's palm, then at the strand of hair on his finger. A dark light slowly appeared on his withered face, and as that light spread through his withered body looked as if it had regained its life force. Lai Shan Xiao. Su Ming's expression remained as calm as ever, but a huge storm was raging in his heart. This was the first time he heard this name, and based on the skeleton's words, this name belonged to the god of berserkers, to the first god of berserkers. I won't be taking away the dragon's soul with me today, but with the power of the god of berserkers, even if I ignore the deaths of the spirits of 9, the crimson dragon sealed in this place must be an important place for you spirits of 9. It'll be best if I can destroy this place, but if I can't, then with my own power and the power of the god of berserkers, I should be able to leave this place without any problems. But from now on, I will search for the lone spirits of 9 and kill them endlessly. With my divine abilities, you saw what I did just now. I can do it. Su Ming forced down the shock in his heart and spoke languidly. The power of the god of berserkers he possessed could even kill Di Tian's clone. This was the reason why he was confident that he could save the Crimson Dragon, and also the true reason why he had gone through so much trouble to come to the 9th palace. If he had revealed the power of the god of berserkers before he got close, then the threat would not have been as great. Only by showing off his own power and using it as a threat would he be able to bring out the best effect. As the skeleton's body recovered, the dark light in his eyes grew stronger. He stared at the strand of hair on Su Ming's finger, and a complicated and nostalgic look appeared on his face. Lai Shan Xiao was the first person to challenge the palace. That was something that happened a long time ago. That presence does indeed belong to him, but I didn't expect that he would manage to take that step. Once he said those words, the skeleton let out a long sigh and looked toward Su Ming. He had heard Su Ming's threat clearly. If the power of the god of berserkers did not exist, then this would just be a joke, but right then, this was no longer a joke. We can make a deal. The skeleton had completely recovered and slowly stood up from the ground. As it stood up, the chains melted and the nails that were nailed to the ground loosened before disappearing without a trace. When the skeleton stood up, he was not tall and was about the same height as Su Ming. As he stood there, a yellow robe gradually appeared on his body. Su Ming did not speak. He just looked at the skeleton. I need this earthen aura dragon soul because the power of earthen aura is incredibly useful to my people. But now, if you can help us with the power of the god of berserkers, then we will naturally not need this dragon soul, the skeleton said languidly. As he spoke, he lifted his right hand and pressed it against the ground. Immediately, the crimson dragon's totem on the ground distorted. As a low roar reverberated in the air, the totem melted, as if a seal had been broken. The crimson dragon's body manifested and flew up from the ground. With a dispirited look on its face, it charged towards Su Ming. At the same time, all the spirits of 9 in the 8 halls at the foot of the mountain no longer attacked. Instead, they retreated and turned back into statues. Soon after, the poison corpse charged forward and arrived beside Su Ming. The small snake also closed in with a loud whistle. And finally, Su Ming's nascent divinity returned with Han Mountain Bell. During the entire process, the spirits of Nine Yin did not try to stop them. They simply allowed them to return to Su Ming's side. "This is my sincerity," the skeleton said slowly and looked towards Su Ming. "If you agree to this, then not only will I let you leave with the earthen aura, you will also obtain the friendship of the spirits of Nine Yin. This friendship will never change." Su Ming put away Han Mountain Bell and his nascent divinity without batting an eyelid, then looked at the skeleton and spoke coldly. "I heard that the shamans and the nobles also had this sort of friendship in the past." The skeleton looked like an ancient old man at that moment. He shook his head towards Su Ming's words. "The shamans did not have any friendship with us. It was just a form of mutual use and agreement. They didn't follow the agreement and brought trouble upon themselves. They can't control us, spirits of Nine Yin." Su Ming frowned and did not speak. "Oh well, there's no harm in me telling you. The agreement between us and the shamans was that we helped them open up an area of 1 million square kilometers in this place and allowed them to build Shaman City. We also did this so that they could live here and willingly submit to us. As repayment, they had to give us what we needed once in a while, and every single time we asked for our help, they had to give us what we needed. Besides, the shamans couldn't send too many powerful shamans here. But 15 years ago, the shamans broke the agreement first and caused this place to collapse." The old man in yellow robes, who was the skeleton, spoke in an ancient voice. "Once you use the power of the god of berserkers, I will no longer have anything that can threaten you. If you go back on your word, then wouldn't I be in danger?" A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes as he spoke slowly. The old man in yellow robes fell silent and walked forward slowly. When he walked out of the hall, he stood outside and looked at the world outside. Su Ming took a few steps back and maintained a certain distance between them. "Everyone has a home." After a long while, the old man suddenly spoke in a hoarse voice. "You have one, the shamans have one, Lai Shanxiu also has one. Similarly, we spirits of Nine Yin also have a home. Right now, the world of Nine Yin is sealed off, and the people outside cannot enter, and the people inside cannot leave either. Do you want to leave?" The old man turned his head around and looked at Su Ming. Su Ming's heart trembled. He had been unwilling to think about this matter over the past few days. Everything that had happened to the fated kin had moved him greatly, and he had a vague feeling that it would be incredibly difficult for him to leave the world of Nine Yin. However, he did not give up hope. Instead, he intended to search for a chance to leave once everything settled down, no matter how slim the chances were. "If you help our people, you will also be helping yourself," the old man said slowly. Su Ming fell silent. "Our people worked together with the shamans because we wanted to use the shamans' convenience to come and go so that we could gather enough items. Over the course of countless years, there was only one thing we desired, and that was to go home. For this, we worked together with the shamans. For this, we were willing to submit to them. For this, our people brought this crimson dragon back. All of this was so that we could go home. Our home is not the world of Nine Yin, neither is it true Morning Tao world. It is the true Sacred Yin world, one of the 4 great true worlds located in the galaxy far, far away from here." The old man's voice was low, but the words he said made Su Ming's breathing quicken, and a storm that surged into the skies raged in his heart. "For this, we could give up on everything. As the evil spirit of our people, I could even put on a show for the shamans so that the shamans would believe that our people were split up. My head would be cut off and offered as an offering in Shaman City so that it would become the shaman's battle achievement and the emblem of light that would allow them to stay in these 1 million lease." The old man mumbled. "True Sacred Yin world, true Morning Tao world, the 4 great true worlds." Su Ming remembered the candle dragon's words before it died. The shamans did not keep to their promise and set up the rune 15 years ago to send a large number of shamans here. But the shamans did not know that once they truly did this, it would be a disaster for the entire world of Nine Yin. Because too much Yin death aura from other races would invade, it would definitely cause the world spirit to attack while it was asleep, and it would start the beginning of a war to destroy all lives. That was why I attacked and killed this danger right when the world spirit's defenses were activated. The old man in yellow robes shook his head. World spirit? Su Ming was stunned. You are a member of Lai Shanxiu's tribe. With his power protecting you, you are not considered an outsider. The world of Nine Yin might seem like a world, but in truth is an enchanted vessel belonging to the true world of the spirits of Nine Yin. This enchanted vessel is incredibly big, and it is used by the cultivators of the true sacred Yin world to move through the galaxy. Only this sort of enchanted vessel can possess the power to break through worlds and move between two true worlds. But countless years ago, we obeyed the will of the true sacred Yin spirit and went out to complete a mission. As we moved through the galaxy, we ran into the gales of a true world. The enchanted vessel was incredibly damaged, and we were forced to come here until now. There was nostalgia on the old man's face as he mumbled softly. Su Ming's heart trembled violently. He instinctively took a few steps back, and it was difficult for him to hide the disbelief on his face. If that's the case, then why is there a candle dragon? Why? Su Ming immediately asked. The candle dragon is one of the 9 sacred beasts of the candle dragon's line. Isn't what you saw already dead? Our tribe's mission in the past was personally given by the paragon of the true sacred Yin spirit. He asked us to go to the other 3 great true worlds and gather all the corpses of the powerful existences. The strength of our ancestors was far greater than what you see now. The old man in yellow robes' gaze fell on Su Ming. Sacred bats, drifting roamers, spirits of Nine Yin, candle dragons, and this is just within the 1 million lease. If what the old man said is true, then it's no wonder why this place is so complicated. Su Ming's breathing quickened as he swiftly digested everything the old man said in his head. He had a vague feeling that the old man was not lying. Su Ming was just about to open his mouth to say something, but his heart trembled. He suddenly remembered that the old man had mentioned the Yin death aura in the world outside. When he mentioned the world spirit's defense? What is the meaning of Yin death aura? Over the countless years, even if our tribe's strength can be said to be among the top 10 in the true sacred Yin spirit, do you really think that all of us can attain eternal life as time passes by? Especially after we crashed into the enchanted vessel that was damaged? Can we still survive? The old man in yellow robes remained silent for a moment before he looked at Su Ming with a complicated expression. Su Ming was momentarily stunned, and his expression suddenly changed drastically. He remembered that the old man had died in the hall before he recovered his life force. You're already dead? A bang went off in Su Ming's head. You can say that. The old man sighed. If you're already dead, then why are you still here? Are you a soul now? A remnant of your will? Su Ming quelled the shock in his heart. When he remembered the candle dragon's will, he could somewhat explain all of this. The old man remained silent. He lifted his head and looked at the sky. After a long while, he looked at Su Ming again, and the complicated look on his face became stronger. Then why are you here as well? If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 542. Please give me your recommendation, and I will continue to make up for April 6 tomorrow. I need recommendation votes. I need recommendation votes 3. Need recommendation votes IV. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 543. Su Ming felt as if his heart had been struck by a hammer. He took a few steps back with a dark expression on his face. 3 scenes flashed in his head. The first was when he saw Bei Ling and Lei Chun on the chains of Han Mountain in Han Mountain City, along with that one sentence. You're clearly dead. I buried you with my own hands. That scene disappeared in an instant and was replaced by the moment Hong Luo disappeared. At the instant he touched the coffin in the land of the shamans, the darkness that appeared in his memories like a dream appeared in his head. Of the 2 babies in the past, the one who was alive was her, and the one who died was me. Soon after, all these scenes shattered, and Di Tian's figure occupied all of Su Ming's memories. Those two aloof words continuously echoed in his head, and did not disappear even after a long time had passed. Destiny. Su Ming stood there and looked at the old man in yellow robes, then at the world behind him. After a long, long while, he asked in anguish, "Am I dead? Perhaps, perhaps not." The old man in yellow robes cast Su Ming a glance and shook his head. "What do you mean?" Su Ming remained silent for a moment before he asked languidly. It was not that he could not accept the old man's words. In truth, he had already seen some clues about this many years ago, but he just could not connect them together. There are two sides in the world, positive and negative. If we compare positive to life, then negative to death. But who can say clearly what is death and what is negative? Perhaps we can treat the boundary between positive and negative as a mirror. The people outside the mirror are looking into the mirror, and the people in the mirror are also looking outside the mirror. They're looking at themselves, but perhaps they're also not themselves. Do you understand? The old man in yellow robes asked languidly. Su Ming frowned. After some time, he cast his gaze towards the world in the distance. Are you saying that the people in the mirror have their own lives, and this is something the people outside the mirror don't know about? Just like you and I, we are both in the mirror? Your comprehensive abilities are pretty good. If Lai Shanxiu values you, then you must have something outstanding about you. My homeland, the true sacredine world, has been researching positive and negative, yin and yang, since a long time ago. And we came to the conclusion that the universe also has positive and negative. We call negative yin death void, and positive bright yang emptiness. When the old man in yellow robes said those words, he suddenly smiled and no longer spoke. Su Ming fell silent. He lifted his right hand and looked at the lock of hair on his finger. After some time, a resolute look appeared on his face. How can I help your people return home? This place was transformed from my clan's magical artifact. This magical artifact was damaged while traversing through space. However, the spirit of this realm, which is the soul of the magical artifact, did not die. Instead, it fell into a deep slumber. It needed a sufficient amount of power to wake up, and only by waking it up could the enchanted vessel be activated once more so that it could return a true sacredine world based on the path it had taken in the past. Over the years, our tribe has accumulated a lot of materials, but it is still not enough. That is why we are working with the shaman tribe. That is why we need this Earth Chi dragon's soul. As long as you send this power into the tribe's rune, we send into the Ming's power, we will calm you all. We can as I say, as you, I will that you have. Once the world spirit wakes up, I will be able to open a relocation rune that will lead to the inner part of the enchanted vessel. With Lai Shanxiu's power, I am 7/10 certain that I will be able to make the world spirit wake up within a short period of time. Once the world spirit wakes up, I will be able to open a relocation rune that will lead to the inner part of the enchanted vessel. I might not be able to use it too much due to the enchanted vessel's power, but I can still send you and your people out of this place and back to the world that belongs to you. I will also tell you about the connection between Yin Death Void and Bright Yang Emptiness at that time. I hope that it will be of help to you. If you want to truly see this world clearly and dare to take the risk, then you could be the last to leave this rune. At that time, you will see the galaxy and the universe. When the old man in yellow robes said those words, he took a few steps back, wrapped his fist in his palm towards Su Ming, and bowed deeply. Everything I said is true. Sir, I hope that you can help me. If you can leave true Morning Tao world one day and head to true Sacredine world, you can search for Sacred Spirit Continent. That is where we spirits of Nine Yin are. I hope that we can meet again in true Sacredine world. Su Ming fell silent. As he looked at the old man before him, he nodded. Everything the old man said made Su Ming feel as if he was in a dream. Based on his own judgment, perhaps the old man's words were not just some random nonsense. Yet no matter what, for the answer in his heart, Su Ming would agree to this. Even if everything the old man said was a lie, even if everything he said was fake, Su Ming would rather believe that everything the old man said was false. When he saw Su Ming nodding his head, the old man in yellow robes sucked in a deep breath and swung his arm. Immediately, the hall in the mountain where he stood started distorting. Once it gradually disappeared, the 8 gigantic statues in it also disappeared, as if everything was just an illusion. Only the gigantic rune left behind by the crimson dragon on the ground after it left was still there. "Sir, please pour your power into this rune with Lai Shanxiu's power." The old man wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed to Su Ming once again. In silence, Su Ming walked slowly towards the rune. When he stood within it, his gaze fell on it. After a long while, he lifted his right hand, and a powerful light and a mighty presence that surged into the sky erupted from the strand of hair on his finger. That presence reverberated in the air, causing the sky to rumble. The air around him looked as if it could not withstand the pressure, and cracks started appearing on it. Right at the instant Su Ming's finger looked as if it was about to fall, he suddenly turned his head around, and his gaze landed on the old man's face like lightning. What he saw was excitement, bitterness, reminiscence, and longing to return home. "I'll believe you this once." Su Ming swiftly brought his right hand down. At the instant he tapped the rune, the strand of hair on his finger started burning rapidly, and an unimaginably large amount of power erupted as it burned and rushed into the rune through Su Ming's finger. At the same time, the mountain where Su Ming stood crumbled inch by inch and turned into ashes that scattered into the air. However, the rune remained. It floated in midair, and the light on it gradually grew brighter. Soon after, all the halls and statues around the disappearing mountain vanished into thin air and turned into ashes. The statues looked as if they had been swept by a destructive wind and fell down one by one, becoming a part of the ground. When the windstorm disappeared and the light from the rune pierced the eyes, there were no longer any mountains or halls in the area. There were only 10 statues left of the spirits of Nine. These 10 statues were all incredibly broken, and they exuded an ancient air of decay, as if they had gone through an endless amount of time. The light from the rune in midair grew brighter, eventually turning into a piercing pillar of light that erupted from within the rune and rushed towards the end of the sky. The instant that pillar of light shot into the sky, another pillar of light shot out from the ground further away. Soon after, pillars of light continuously appeared in the boundless world of Nine. Su Ming might not be able to see everything, but he could feel the world trembling. There was only a small amount of hair left on Su Ming's finger. When the pillar of light erupted, his body was bounced off by a huge force, and he was forced back several thousands of feet. His face turned pale, and he coughed out a mouthful of blood. He looked at his surroundings with a dumbfounded expression. He looked at the disappearing halls and the disappearing statues. All of this felt incredibly real to him, and it also meant that what the old man had said just now was not false. "I'll remember your kindness." The old man in yellow robes had an excited look on his face. Once he wrapped his fist in his palm towards Su Ming, he charged towards the pillar of light from the rune. The rune will be activated one after another. I'll summon the world spirit with all my might to wake up. If I'm fast, it'll take half a month. If I'm slow, it'll take a month. The world of Nine will be turned upside down. Benefactor, please gather your people quickly. When the world spirit wakes up, I'll open the tunnel for all of you. Su Ming looked at the old man in yellow robes disappearing into the pillar of light and remained silent for a moment. With an anguished look on his face, he gave up on trying to turn into destiny once again at all costs. This was the final preparation he made just in case. If everything the old man said was false, then Su Ming could still use the span of 15 breaths to make some slight changes. However, it did not matter whether it was the drastic change in his surroundings or the actions of the old man in yellow robes. All of these proved that the old man did not harbor any ill will. If Su Ming were to make these deductions, then the credibility of his words had already reached a level where they were practically the truth. This was what Su Ming desperately wanted to know, and it was also what he did not want to face. In silence, Su Ming put away the crimson dragon, causing it to turn into a totem on his left arm. The dragon had used up too much of its energy and had fallen into deep sleep. No one knew when it would wake up. With the poisoned corpse and the small snake, Su Ming turned around and walked towards the direction of the fated Kin's Valley. His back was incredibly bleak, and there was a lonely and lost air about him as he gradually left into the distance. The pillar of light behind him surged into the sky. The ground under his feet trembled, and the clouds above him tumbled about. All of these were signs that a drastic change was about to happen. Half a month, 1 month. All the answers will be revealed the instant I leave, Su Ming mumbled. Determination slowly appeared in his eyes. No matter what the answer was, he would continue walking down this path. No matter what the answer meant, there were some things that Su Ming felt he had to find out. His body disappeared into the distance. As he walked in the sky, he spread his divine sense outwards and covered the area in the distance, until the ruins of Shaman City appeared in his divine sense. He then saw a wandering soul drifting about in those ruins, and it belonged to Ahu. There was also a woman Su Ming was familiar with standing among the group of wandering souls that could not be seen with the naked eye outside the ruins of the shaman tribe. She didn't leave in the past. Su Ming's footsteps came to a halt in midair, and he turned his head around to look at the spot where the woman was in his divine sense. Please recommend me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 544. It was a weak soul, a soul that had lost its intelligence and had drifted about the land for many years in a daze. She wandered about aimlessly, and she did not know where she would end up. Her body could not be seen with the naked eye. Only divine sense could see her beautiful face clearly, and her dazed eyes could be seen clearly. She was dressed in a white veil that was formed by a soul. She floated about, and there were many souls like her by her side. They did not seem to be able to see each other and were only wandering about in groups. She originally had no memories. She had forgotten how she died and how she became like this. She only vaguely remembered that she seemed to be searching for something, yet she could no longer remember what she was looking for. She walked, floated, and searched again and again. Was she looking for the direction of her home? Was she looking for the warmth in her life? Was she looking for the location of her sect? She was the Celestial Maiden. With her status, she should have left 15 years ago during the drastic change. With her status, as an immortal, this place did not belong to her. She should have left the world of 9 with the people from her sect, yet she still appeared in Su Ming's divine sense, in the form of a drifting roamer. Su Ming stood there and looked at her, who could not be seen with the naked eye, but could be seen clearly with his divine sense among the dozen-something drifting roamers. He looked at her pale face, her floating soul, and the dazed look in her eyes. This was the only person who had been worried about Su Ming when Tianlan Ming had lowered her head during the treasure gambling event, when Wan Xiao, the sacred lady of Autumn Sea tribe, had avoided his gaze, and when no one had said a single word for him. Su Ming truly did not know much about this woman. He had only seen her in the battlefield between the shamans and berserkers all those years ago and heard her call him Destiny. After that was Hong Luo's memories. He had some contact with this woman, and after that, he had no memories of her until they met in the world of 9. He could not even remember the woman's name clearly. He only knew that there were people who called her the Celestial Maiden. This was a very strange title. What was the Celestial Maiden? Was it Destiny's Celestial Maiden? Su Ming looked at her and fell silent. The drifting roamers floated past him. They did not seem to be able to see him and treated him as if he did not exist. When 7 or 8 drifting roamers walked past him, the woman in the white veil closed in on him. With a dazed look in her eyes, she approached Su Ming slowly. The instant she floated past him, she came to an abrupt halt. She seemed to have noticed something and turned her head around to look at Su Ming. However, in her eyes, she only saw emptiness. Yet for some unknown reason, she felt that this place was incredibly warm, as if this was the place she had been searching for all this while. She lifted her hands slowly as if she wanted to touch the warmth. Su Ming looked at her and let her place her hand on his body and touch his face. Very cold. That was the first thing Su Ming felt. He saw that the woman's soul was originally expressionless, but at this moment, a smile gradually appeared on her face. That smile was very beautiful, and it was filled with innocence, as well as an indescribable attachment. She touched Su Ming's face and slowly got closer to him. She slowly snuggled into his embrace and closed her eyes. A satisfied expression appeared on her face, as if she had searched for a long, long time and had finally found her home. She was a celestial maiden, Destiny's celestial maiden. 15 years ago, she could have left, but she did not. She chose to stay. There was no destiny in the world outside. Then she was no longer a celestial maiden. Only in this place, where destiny existed, was she Destiny's celestial maiden. She had been a weak girl since she was young, but she had changed because of a single name. She might have been one of the many celestial maidens, but her only goal when she descended from the land of immortals was to see destiny with her own eyes. That was why she did not leave. That was why, after searching for several years, she turned into a drifting wanderer on a rainy night. Yet even if she had already turned into a soul, even if she had forgotten everything and lost her intelligence, she still continued searching. Su Ming looked at the woman's soul before him, and in silence, he sensed her attachment. He stood there. Day, night, vaguely, a feeling that did not exist in the past rose up in his memories. It was an endless night. It was very cold, and loneliness turned into an eternity. He had no idea how many years had passed since he lost his little sister's voice. He continued lying there. He could sense everything in the world around him, but he was already numb to it. He had already forgotten about it. Then, a voice with a hint of youthfulness and timidity whispered weakly beside him. "Big brother, hello. My surname is Bai. It means white. I'm Ling Yer. I'm from Hidden Dragon Sect. Big brother, are you Destiny? What does Destiny mean? Why do they all call you Destiny? Big brother, I miss home. I don't want to be here. Do you miss home? Where is your home? Let me tell you, my home is really beautiful. I also have a younger brother, but I haven't seen him for a long time. Big brother, Grandpa Mo said that I could be like the others and become a celestial maiden, but I don't want to be like them. I want to become a celestial maiden that belongs to you from now on. No matter where you go in the future, I will always be by your side. Big brother, I want to see you when you wake up. I'll go and find you. Will you remember me?" The darkness in his memories slowly faded away, and what appeared before Su Ming's eyes was still the chaotic sky in the world of Nine, the trembling ground, and the pillars of light that connected the sky and earth in the dark night from a place far away. Su Ming lowered his head and looked at the woman in his arms. She had her eyes closed, as if she was in deep sleep. There was sweetness in her satisfied smile. "Bai, Ling." Grief gradually filled Su Ming's eyes. He suddenly understood something, but it was still a little indistinct. After remaining silent for a long time, Su Ming let go of her in anguish, but the woman's soul held onto him tightly and refused to let go. Even if she grabbed onto empty air, she still refused to let go. Su Ming put her away into a storage bag, then went to the ruined shaman city and found Ahu's soul. Once he also put it away, he walked alone towards the fated kin's valley in the dark sky. When morning arrived, Su Ming returned to the fated kin's valley. He stood on the valley and looked at the hundreds of fated kin before him. Suddenly, he could not tell whether these people were alive or dead. He sat down and looked at the sky, feeling lost. The sun rose and set. One day passed by, and Su Ming sat there, unable to obtain an answer. Perhaps I will only know all the answers when I leave this place. When night fell on the third day, Su Ming opened his eyes. The world spirit in this place is about to wake up, and the world will be turned upside down during this period of time. Then before I leave, I still have one more question. Eternally Mountain. A focused glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes, and he forced down the shock and confusion in his heart due to his trip to the spirits of Nine. He stood up and looked into the distance in the dark. After a long while, Su Ming turned into a long arc and disappeared into the dark sky. He spread out his divine sense and charged towards the place where the sacred bats were. That place would be his final stop in the world of Nine. He would search for the reason behind the burning of blood, search for the reason why the fire berserker art in his memories would appear in this place, and search for the parts of his memories that were wrong. There was also the part of Eternally Mountain that he was familiar with. Su Ming found the answer in his heart, and he would go and verify it. As he charged through the sky, Su Ming spread his divine sense outwards several times, but he did not find Ji Yunhai's presence. The puppet that was Ji Yunhai seemed to have disappeared and could not be found. When dawn arrived and the sacred bats appeared before Su Ming, he still did not find any ripples of power from Ji Yunhai. Before Su Ming was a land filled with an endless amount of cracks and ravines. Those ravines were so deep that they could not be measured, and there were waves of freezing air spreading out and filling the area. It was especially so for a spot on the ground in the distance. That was where all the cracks and ravines intersected. There was no pit there, and neither were there any ravines. There was only a mountain there. A mountain that towered into the clouds, was entirely black, and exuded an eerie, freezing air. This mountain did not exist 15 years ago. It was as if it had crawled out of the ground and stood erect in the world. Almost the instant Su Ming closed in on the place, he saw an innumerable amount of aloof eyes suddenly appearing in the endless black ravines on the ground in the dark night. Those pairs of eyes were shining brightly in the darkness as they stared at him. Not only were the ravine filled with such eyes, Su Ming also saw a large number of them on the towering mountain, and all of them were gathered on his body. Aloof, merciless, bloodthirsty, and all sorts of other meanings were contained in those pairs of eyes on the ground, and it was enough to make all those who saw them feel their hearts tremble. But Su Ming did not. He walked forward quietly. He only had one goal, and that was that mountain. That mountain was known as Eternally Among the Sacred Bats. As Su Ming got closer, a piercing howl reverberated from the ground. That was not the voice of a single sacred bat, but the roar of all the sacred bats in the land at the same time. That voice was like a wave of sound that contained a presence that could shake the sky and earth. The instant it rose into the air, it made it seem as if the sun in the sky was about to fade away, but could not make Su Ming's footsteps falter for even a single moment. As that voice reverberated in the air, the sounds of wings flapping could be heard, and the pairs of eyes in the darkness swiftly closed in on Su Ming as they flashed, and those eyes turned into an endless amount of sacred bats. The instant these sacred bats rushed towards Su Ming, an ancient voice suddenly traveled forth languidly from the top of the mountain. "Sacred bats who worship me, do not be so noisy. This is my guest. I've been waiting for him for a long, long time." As his voice reverberated in the air, the sacred bats who were about to rush out no longer made a single sound and returned to the canyons. Even their sparkling eyes slowly faded away, and eventually, the land was plunged into darkness once again. It seemed like there really was one more chapter left. If you like this work, please come to Start Point and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 545. Su Ming continued moving forward. He walked through the ravines on the ground in midair and walked into the core of the sacred bats, arriving at the top of the mountain. There he saw a stone monument. That stone monument stood tall, and from the distance, it looked like the peak of a mountain. There were a large amount of words carved on it, and there was an old man sitting cross-legged under it. That old man's clothes were ragged, and his hair was a mess. Su Ming could not see his face clearly. He had his head lowered, as if he was meditating. Tens of thousands of years ago, the god of berserkers, Lai Shan Xiao, opened up the land of berserkers and created his own cultivation method. He created the power of the berserkers and built the Great Yu dynasty. All races worshipped him, and the leaders of all races needed the god of berserkers' permission to be appointed. Then, he left in search of the plain Kulpa and left, leaving behind his legacy in the world. There was a man who became famous in Qi Mountain, and his title was Pa. He came to understand the will of the god of berserkers in the Great Yu dynasty and inherited his legacy, but he could not obtain even half of it. He was known as the second god of berserkers, Chi Shan Pa. The immortals and evildoers could not accept this, and the calamity rose again. The will of Morning Tao was also present, and the land of berserkers was torn to pieces. Chi Shan Po's body was torn to pieces and buried in the 5 continents. The ancient voice echoed in the mountain. Su Ming stood before the old man with his head lowered and listened to it quietly. As the old man spoke, the words on the stone monument behind him slowly disappeared. The words looked clear at first glance, but when Su Ming took a closer look, he found that they were indistinct, and he could not tell what was written on them. At that moment, Su Ming was already certain that his judgment regarding Eternally Mountain before he came here was correct. He still remembered the words spoken by the remaining berserker he had met when he was in the candle dragon's body. He might have only said half of what he wanted to say, but the final word he uttered in the end was Eternally Mountain. And when Su Ming heard about it, he could already make some guesses. 10,000 years later, I was born in Eastern Wastelands, and I was fated to receive the will of the god of berserkers. I went through many dangers and finally reached Great Yu, and all I saw, heard, and felt was not half of the second god of berserkers. I might be known as the third god, but I knew that I was not strong enough to become a god. I searched for the traces of my ancestor and died in the world of 9 Now I thought that I had awakened, but in the end, I could not. The ancient voice gradually faded away, and the old man, sitting beside the stone monument, lifted his head slowly. It was a very ordinary face, but there were traces of time on it. It was so old that one would feel the passage of time and the vicissitudes of time when one looked at it. I know that I will definitely be able to see you, the old man said calmly as he looked at Su Ming. Su Ming looked at the old man before him and did not speak. The difference is that you were captured, or you came here on your own accord. If you were captured, then you're not worthy of the Berserker tribe's cultivation base. You will not be able to create your statue of the god of berserkers. Why don't you stay and become the soul of the berserkers and sink into oblivion forever? If you came here on your own, then you can receive my inheritance, the old man said slowly, and the berserker mark gradually appeared on his face. It was at the center of his brows, and it looked like a burning moon. Once my will disappears, send my soul back to Great Yu. When my soul returns, it will become the catalyst for the berserkers to break through to Berserker Soul Realm. Once they reach the Berserker Soul Realm, their blood would change. They would gain success in cultivating their blood, bones, and souls. It would be as if everything inside and out had reached perfection. At that moment, they would no longer be cultivating their bodies, but their life matrix, to break through one's fate and find the path that one lacks. This is fated lack. Knowing one's own flaws was like knowing the regrets of heaven and earth. It was like understanding the changes of the world. This was the Fate Palace. The Divine Master's life palace shines with an endless brilliance. It can attract the power of the world plane. This is the world of life. Life Matrix, Fated Lack, Life Palace, and World of Life. These are the Berserker's path of life cultivation after they reach the Berserker Soul Realm. If they step into the path of life cultivation. The old man looked at Su Ming. His words spread out and echoed in the air, but Su Ming continued standing there, only listening and not moving. I lack fire in my life. That's why I absorbed all the flames in the world in the path of life cultivation. However, in the end, I discovered to my shock that this fire is not yang. But this fire exists only in the moon. That's why I worship the moon and call myself the Berserker Cultivator of Fire. However, I cannot understand the moon's flames, and neither can I sense the bright flames. My will has turned into yin and yang. One of them is the Fire Berserker, and the other is the God of Berserkers. It is just like how the sky has darkness and daylight. Only bitterness remains in the sky. Why should the sky weep? I have obtained countless serendipities in my life, but in the end, I will be buried in sacred Yin's vessel. Sorrow, grief, bitterness, greed. The old man looked at Su Ming, and as he mumbled, his words were filled with endless emotions. Most of the words on the stone monument behind him had disappeared by then, and soon there would be no more words left. I am Li Shanhua, the third god of berserkers. I looked at the sky before me, and I closed my eyes to remain. If you are one of my people in the future, do not forget my path. The stone monument behind me is the blessing left behind by the first god of berserkers, but the third is the end. Once the old man finished speaking, the final line of words on the stone monument behind him became indistinct and eventually disappeared. At that moment, the entire stone monument was empty. As all the words on the stone monument disappeared, the face of the old man who had been mumbling to himself before Su Ming also started decaying, and gradually, right before Su Ming's eyes, he shattered. At that moment, a gentle breeze blew past and scattered the old man's body. It swept up his ashes and floated into the distance. Only 3 round pearls remained on the ground where the old man was sitting. The color of those pearls was dull, but there was an indescribable strangeness about them, as if they could devour light, and they were incredibly eye-catching. The old man had died a long time ago. Perhaps what remained was a wisp of his soul, or perhaps it was a hint of his will, or perhaps it was some other form of existence. But no matter what, he had already died an unknown number of years ago. That was why Su Ming still did not speak. He had long since noticed that when the old man had looked at him, he had not seen his figure in his pupils. At that moment, he understood that the old man was looking at something left behind by an unknown number of years ago. It was not him. Su Ming did not know what that meant by waking up, but when he stood on the mountain and saw the old man, he only saw the 3 pearls on the ground at that moment. As for the old man, he was an illusion and semi-transparent. He floated above the 3 pearls, as if he was a shadow that had existed in the passage of time. All he wanted was to say those words and inherit the legacy of the god of berserkers. At the same time, when the old man disappeared and the words on the stone monument disappeared, the sacred bats in the endless cracks in the ravines on the ground at the foot of the mountain started trembling. Gradually, their bodies started morphing. As they shrank, they changed from human form to bat form. They circled a few times in the sky, as if they had covered the sky. They let out screeching sounds, and after a long while, they gradually returned to the ravines on the ground. They left in groups and disappeared without a trace. As they disappeared, the mountain where Su Ming was started trembling and slowly sank down. By the looks of it, it looked as if it wanted to return to the depths of the ground, just like when it had appeared in the past. Su Ming stood on the mountain and sensed the mountain sinking down. He closed his eyes. He might not have found the answer in his heart when he came to this place, but he felt as if he had found it. After the Berserker Soul Realm is Life Matrix, Life Privation, Life Palace, and World of Life. This is the path of life cultivation. Su Ming lifted his right hand and swung his arm, sweeping up the 3 pearls and the stone monument on the ground. Once he put them away into his storage bag, he opened his eyes and cast a glance at the spot where the old man had disappeared, then turned around and walked towards the sky. Once he left the mountain, it sank down with a rumbling sound and eventually disappeared from the ground. The ravines on the ground closed up once again, and gradually, not a single crack remained on the ground. Su Ming stood in midair with a slightly dazed look on his face. He only recovered after a long while. What he saw was an illusion left behind by the third god of berserkers before they died. Perhaps the berserker in the candle dragon body had heard those words before, but why did he appear in the candle dragon's body? Why did he not take away the third god of berserkers' 3 pearls? These were questions that Su Ming could not think of. The legacy left behind by the first god of berserkers ends at the 3rd generation. This must be the reason why the words on the stone monument disappeared. Only passed down to the 3rd generation. Huh? Su Ming turned around and walked towards the fated Kin's Valley. The heaviness in his heart could be seen from his footsteps in midair. It ends at the 3rd generation, Su Ming mumbled. He could vaguely imagine a tall figure leading his subordinates in the sky of the Great Yu Dynasty countless years ago, before the land of the Berserkers was torn apart. Before he left, he turned his head back and cast a glance at the ground. It ends at the third generation. Once a person's level of cultivation reaches the level of the first god of Berserkers, then the so-called Great Yu dynasty and the so-called Berserkers are no longer important. He brought the Berserkers to power and left behind the god of Berserkers' song for the future generations to praise, but it's impossible for him to protect the Berserkers forever. Being able to pass down his legacy to 3 generations is already his final parting. If there's someone among the 3 generations who can surpass him, then his legacy will continue, but if no one can surpass him, then the Berserkers will no longer be his concern. Su Ming's vision gradually became clear. He suddenly understood that the first god of Berserkers might not be able to return to the land of the Berserkers in this lifetime. Su Ming shook his head and disappeared into the darkness that shrouded the world. At that moment, beyond the world of Nine, in the land of South Morning, where the Berserkers and the shamans resided, was going through a shocking disaster. This disaster could no longer be hidden. Over the years, all the cultivators in the land had learned of it. The catastrophe of the eastern wastelands. This disaster should have arrived several years ago, but the shamans and Berserkers had used all sorts of methods to delay it. Yet now, no matter what they did, it was impossible for them to stop this disaster. To the east of South Morning, the seawater roared and huge waves surged into the sky. A large amount of seawater had already submerged a small portion of the land of the shamans. As the seawater surged into the sky, countless mountains sank into the sea, and many lives lost everything in this disaster. There were an endless amount of ferocious beasts in the seawater, along with the giant with half its head sticking out of the water. At that moment, they were moving forward with the seawater on the land of the shamans. The seawater roared, and there was no end to it. If anyone stood at the edge of the submerged land of the shamans and looked into the distance, they would be able to see a gigantic black shadow not too far away. That shadow seemed to have no end. This was a gigantic continent, a continent known as the Eastern Wastelands. It had finally arrived. What awaited the land of South Morning was a true disaster that was several times worse than the seawater spreading out. In fact, it was something that could not even be compared to. That was the collision between 2 continents. One of them would definitely crumble and break apart. Just 2 more chapters and I'll be done. I'm almost there. Please get recommendation votes. Please get monthly votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to cast recommendation votes and monthly votes. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 546. As the sacred bats disappeared, Su Ming took the 3 pearls that were the 3rd god of Berserkers and returned to the fated Kin's Valley with a complicated look on his face. The rainy season had yet to end. Rain fell from the sky like a curtain of pearls, causing most of the people living in the valley to stay at the entrance of their cave abodes and meditate quietly as they looked outside. With the rain in his face, Su Ming returned to his cave abode in the valley. Once he sat down cross-legged, he closed his eyes, and the things he saw in the sacred bats appeared in his head. After a long while, Su Ming lowered his head and flipped his right hand over. The 3 pearls shone with a dark light on his palm and absorbed all the light around him. These 3 pearls should be the soul the 3rd god of Berserker spoke of. They're also the things he wanted me to place in the Great Yu dynasty. But is the Great Yu dynasty still around? In silence, Su Ming clenched his fist. Once he put away the 3 pearls, he remembered the stone monument that no longer had any words on it. The legacy of 1 generation will end at the 3rd. Lai Shanxiu, what a resolute man. Su Ming mumbled. He could vaguely sense the 1st god of Berserker's state of mind when he left. If that's the case, then it's impossible for the 4th god of Berserkers to appear again. They've lost the god of Berserker's legacy. Their future will depend on how the Berserkers choose to walk down it. Su Ming lowered his head and looked at the strand of hair on his finger. Suddenly, a glint appeared in his eyes. Did the god of Berserkers Lai Shanxiu truly no longer care about the berserkers and cut off their blood ties. If that's the case, then how do you explain this strand of hair? Besides, with Lai Shanxiu's strength in the past, how could he not have predicted that the berserkers would face a crisis after he left? If that's the case, then besides the legacy he left behind, even if it ends at the third generation, I refuse to believe that he didn't leave anything else behind. He must have had great confidence in himself before he left so calmly. Also, the old skeleton from the Spirit of Nine Een once said that I'm the fourth person to clear the 8 halls and stand before him. The first person must be the first god of berserkers, and the third person before me might be the third god of berserkers. Then, who is the second? Su Ming frowned and fell into deep thought. The third god of berserkers didn't mention that the second god of berserkers had also come to the world of Nine Een. If that's the case, then who could the second person be? It might be the second god of berserkers, but it might also be possible that he isn't. Su Ming fell into pensive silence for a moment. He did not have too many clues in this matter, and it was difficult for him to deduce the truth. Hence, he suppressed his doubts and temporarily stopped thinking about this matter. The spirits of Nine Een said that the world spirit will wake up in half a month if it's fast, and a month if it's slow. Several days have passed since then. I don't have much time left. As Su Ming sat down, he spread his divine sense outwards. When it enveloped the entire valley, he found Nan Gonghen meditating and told him that he wanted to leave. Nan Gonghen opened his eyes in the midst of his meditation, and his breathing instantly quickened. Without a hint of hesitation, he immediately walked out of his cave abode and charged towards Su Ming. After a moment, Nan Gonghen stood respectfully by Su Ming's side in his cave abode. Keep an eye on the sky at all times. A great change will happen soon. When the time comes, I will choose to leave this place. However, this trip might be filled with great danger, or I might not be able to return. Tell this to all the fated kin. Do you want to leave or stay? Give me an answer. Su Ming looked at Nan Gonghen and spoke languidly. Nan Gonghen remained silent for a moment before he nodded his head and left. Once Nan Gonghen left, Su Ming fell into a moment of pensive silence before he also stood up and walked out of his cave abode. It was raining outside. The raindrops the size of beans fell on the mountain and let out light pattering sounds, but they were very concentrated and connected together to form a wave of sound, making it difficult for anyone to hear just how much rain was falling during those pattering sounds. Su Ming walked through the valley in the rain and walked along the path leading to the deeper parts of the valley. That was where the beast bone altar in the world of Nine Een was located. It was also the place where the shaman spirit mediums were born. Since he had to leave within a short period of time, before he left, Su Ming wanted to stay by the beast bone altar and sense the mysteriousness of this place. As Su Ming walked towards the periphery of the altar, the first thing he saw was the burial mounds all over the ground covered in rain. The names of all the people who had died during the past 15 years were carved on the stone plates on the mounds. When Su Ming walked past the burial mounds, he saw Tai Mu's grave. He stood there in silence for a moment before he continued walking forward. Before long, as Su Ming continued moving forward, he heard faint calls in his ears. Those calls were not coming from just one person, but from a group of people, giving off a feeling that there was no end to them. The rain around him became even more indistinct. There were even wisps of fog seeping out from the ground and floating in midair, filling up his vision. Su Ming's footsteps came to a halt. Before him was a gigantic altar. That altar stood tall, and due to the indistinct nature of the place, he could not see the top of it. He could only see a flight of stairs leading down. The stairs were dark red and exuded a bloody stench. It was as if the blood that had accumulated there for an unknown number of years had fused together with the altar as it dried up, causing the rain to also turn red when it fell on the altar, but it could not wash it off completely. Su Ming looked at the altar and the stairs before him. After a moment of thought, he walked up. The moment he stepped on the first step, a low roar suddenly traveled into his ears and echoed in all directions. Roar! It was just one roar, but it was so loud that it shook the sky and earth like thunder in the rain. Indistinct soul shadows also appeared from the burial mounds and the land around him. That roar was formed by their roars at the same time. The place where spirit mediums are born. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He walked up the second step, and with each step, he eventually stood at the top of the altar. There he saw a gigantic skeleton pinned to the ground at the top of the altar. There was no flesh or blood on that skeleton, only bones. It looked as if it had its head lifted and opened its mouth to shout at the sky once again. Su Ming's pupils shrank. The sight of the skeleton pinned to the ground reminded him of the yellow-robed old man that was formed by the skeleton in the 9th palace of the spirits of Nine Yin's Mountain. Su Ming cast a few scrutinizing glances at the skeleton before his gaze fell on the distance. With that one glance, he suddenly shuddered and a brilliant light shone in his eyes. This was the first time he stood on the altar, and this was the first time he looked into the distance. In his eyes, the altars like the one under his feet stretched out endlessly, forming a long line that stretched into the distance. He could not count how many of them there were, but there was a skeleton on each of the altars. If that was all, Su Ming would not have been so shocked. He could see that besides the skeletons on each of the altars, there was also a person standing on each of them. A person dressed in white with his hair floating in the air was looking into the distance. That was Su Ming. After a long while, Su Ming averted his gaze and looked back at the path he came from. Everything there was the same as before. He could see the burial mounds under the stairs, as well as the canyon and the valley behind them. Su Ming turned around and looked into the distance before the altar once again. The strange sight just now appeared once again. Su Ming looked at the countless altars, the countless skeletons, and the countless copies of himself. He frowned. He believed that this change was caused by an illusion. He moved and turned into a long arc that charged toward the altar that was the closest to him. However, almost the instant he moved, the countless copies of himself on the countless altars before him moved simultaneously. It was the same for the places further away. In fact, the altars that stretched out endlessly also added an innumerable amount of altars in an instant. When he stood on the second altar, the frown between Su Ming's brows grew deeper. He might have guessed that this was an illusion, but he could not explain how it came about. It was as if the path before him was endless, and it would be difficult for him to reach the deepest part. A rune, huh? Su Ming moved backwards and turned into a long arc that returned to the first altar. When he retreated to the stairs, everything disappeared. The rain continued falling all around him, and the illusion Su Ming believed to be an illusion disappeared. There's still 10 days. As Su Ming frowned in thought, an ancient voice suddenly traveled into his ears from beside him. That voice was incredibly faint, and there was not a single sign that it had appeared. Su Ming turned around, and a person had appeared behind him at some unknown point of time. That person was naturally the old spirit of Nine Yin in yellow robes. However, his body was an illusion, as if he was transparent, and he looked incredibly unreal. 10 days later, the world spirit will wake up. You can take your people and leave. Once this enchanted vessel is activated, I'll have it send me home based on the path it took all those years ago. The old man smiled and looked at Su Ming. What is this altar? Su Ming suddenly asked. This is a relocation rune within the enchanted vessel. It's something unique to true sacredine world. We call it the mirror, the old man said languidly as he looked at the rune. Don't you think that it's like the world in the mirror when people look at it? There are countless copies of themselves, and they're the same. If you move, it will move as well, and if you don't move, it will remain still. The old man's voice filled the area, and it drifted about in the air. If it's a relocation rune, then where does it relocate to? Su Ming frowned. The world in the mirror. There are two sides in the universe, and this rune is the boundary. It's a pity that it's not complete. With the power of true sacredine world, we can only do this much. We can't make it complete. Do you want to see the world in the mirror? The old man asked softly as he looked at Su Ming. How do I do it? A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. As long as you can surpass the changes brought about by your actions and persevere, then when all your mirror shadows find it hard to imitate you, you will be able to see the world in the mirror. This is a hidden law that exists in the world. We in Sacredine world call it the law of human evasion. There are quite a number of powerful warriors in Sacredine world who believe that if they can completely understand this law, then they will be able to walk down the path leading to the great Tao, the old man said with a myriad of emotions in his voice. He cast Su Ming a glance, and his body gradually turned into an illusion before he eventually turned transparent and disappeared. There is no danger in this rune, but you cannot retreat. If you take a step back, then you will have to start from the beginning again. I have already activated the rune for you. As the first person who has the chance to walk through this rune over the course of countless years, this is a gift from us spirits of Nine, as a form of friendship. Unfortunately, I have to inform all of you that there's a power outage again today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.